Thank you all. This will be it. This is it. And when I say this is it, it really means this is it.
These were the words Michael Jackson used to describe his highly anticipated comeback in 2009. In some ways, you could say he predicted his own death and knew, somewhere in his heart of hearts, that this tour was never going to happen.
This is the final curtain call.
This Is It was a 50-show concert residency that was going to take place at the O2 Arena in London. The first show was scheduled for July 13th, 2009, but just 8 days before Michael was set to depart for London on June 25th, 2009, he passed away, suddenly and tragically.
Sir, we have a gentleman here that needs help, and he's not breathing yet. He's not breathing, and we're trying to pump him, but he's not. He's okay.
This would have been the first time Michael had toured since the History Tour ended in 1997. But what made him decide to go on tour after all these years? How did what started as 10 shows blow up to 50? Could a man that hadn't toured in 12 years, physically, mentally, and emotionally, pull off a 50-show concert residency? And if he couldn't,
we have 100 hours of the most intimate HD footage of every audition, every rehearsal, everything. Okay, Michael really let the cameras come in. He felt comfortable. We were all family. In a way, he's not always that comfortable in public. So we have that in HD. We have almost pretty much a full performance, dress rehearsal, and we have enough material for 2 live albums, which is never put out. So we have all that material. How we're going to exploit it and use it for the estate, the benefit, our benefit slightly, and the estate's benefit, we haven't figured out.
Then what? Did the culmination of the tour and whatever was going on behind closed doors lead to Michael Jackson's untimely death? Well, in this 4-part series, we'll be busting those doors down and getting to the bottom of what really happened. So strap in, darlings, as we explore the dark side of Michael Jackson's This Is It.
I feared that Michael was physically unable to do the shows in his condition.
Did you think that he was vulnerable enough that he might die?
Yes.
Welcome to part 1 of the dark side of Michael Jackson's This Is It. In this part, we'll be doing what I call setting the stage. It's a popular idiom in the English language, usually used in theater, meaning to create the conditions for something to happen and create the environment, if you will, darling. In order for us to properly understand what led to Michael's decision to embark on the This Is It tour, and to have a better idea of why certain things went the way they did, we have to talk about his life prior to 2009. So, we're going to be discussing Michael's reputation, finances, issues with touring, and his management in these final years to get us prepared for showtime. Go ahead and get your tea brewing, and perhaps pour a little something extra in your cup, because we don't have time to spill today. We're going to be straight sipping, hunty.
The bigger the star, the bigger the target. I'm not trying to say I'm the super duper star of the city. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, the fact that people come at celebrity. We're targets.
The year 2000 marked not only the turn of the century, but also Sony and the general public's hunger for new Michael Jackson music. At this time, the last album he released would be his 1997 album, Blood on the Dance Floor, which was technically a remix album and only contained 5 new tracks. Prior to that would be History in 1995, a double album containing 15 of his greatest hits and 15 new songs. That album came after a time of turmoil in Michael's life, his first round of child molestation allegations in 1993. After the settlement of these allegations, his image was irreparably damaged, as well as his overall profitability and revenue. Also, for the girls in the balcony,
I love all the girls in the balcony.
he did not want to settle those allegations back then. He was advised to by his legal counsel at the time, and because it would have been an unfair trial due to MJ having to go to a civil trial first and his defense being given away, not to mention many other factors that I don't have time to get into. So I'll just let MJ explain.
I talked to my lawyers and I said, can you guarantee me that justice will prevail? And they said, Michael, we cannot guarantee you that a judge or a jury will do anything. So what I did, we got together again with my advisors and they advised me, it was hands down, a unanimous decision, resolve the case. This could be something that could go on for 7 years.
How much money
we said, let's get it behind us.
Can you say how much?
It's not what the tabloids have printed. It's not all this crazy outlandish money. No, it's not at all. I mean, the terms of the agreement are very confidential.
I want to ask
barred to discuss it.
the specific
terms,
so
it's specific amounts.
The idea is just isn't fair. What they put me through, because there wasn't one piece of information that says I did that.
Thank you. Anyway, MJ started production on what would become his final studio album, Invincible, in 1997, although it did not release until October of 2001. Due to the girls fighting behind the scenes, this album would be an underwhelming release for both Sony and MJ. Promotion was halted, MJ's artistic vision was watered down, and it was dubbed a commercial disappointment. After the release of the aforementioned commercial disappointment, MJ went on his Sony hate crusade, and 2002 wouldn't be any better, as the media would ridicule, harass, and mock Michael Jackson. During this year, his third child, Prince Michael Jackson II, aka Blanket, now known as BG, was born. This would also be the year Michael was, allegedly, I like not being sued, sabotaged at the 2002 MTV Video Music Awards, where he was supposed to receive an Artist of the Millennium Award, but was made to look ridiculous as the award apparently never existed. And what MJ grabbed was simply a cake topper mistaken for an award.
Wow. God bless you. I love you too. Thank you very much, Britney Spears. You look wonderful. When I was a little boy in Indiana, if someone had told me that one day I would be getting, as a musician, the Artist of the Millennium Award, I wouldn't have believed it. This is really amazing. I can't believe it. Thank you so very much.
The VMAs that year were held on August 29th, Michael's 44th birthday, which is why he was given a cake and Britney Spears was there to simply give him birthday wishes and say a kind word.
I am thrilled to be here with you in New York on such a special night. And it's even more special because it just so happens to be someone special's birthday. This is someone who has inspired me and just about everybody in this room and the world. I consider him the artist of the millennium. He's a true innovator who pioneered the art of music video, broke down countless barriers, and sold more records than any other artist along the way. So happy birthday, my friend, the King of Pop.
But my question is, if what MJ grabbed was a cake topper, why was it not on top of the cake? And why did it quite literally look exactly like an award? If not an award, why award shaped? And if it was simply a mistake of communication and not a jab at Michael, why in the frick frack diddly dack was Jack Black at the VMAs the following year dressed as Michael, making fun of him and his speech?
I don't know what to thank you, Fred. Oh, God. You guys, stop it. Seriously. Seriously, people. If someone had told me when I was a little kid that I was going to win the Super Genius of the Universe Award, I'd have said, you no way. You're crazy. And I've won it. I won it.
Michael! Frank Cassio, Michael's longtime friend and at one point his personal assistant turned manager in regards to this situation per his book, My Friend Michael, stated, Trudy Green, Michael's manager at the time, told him that at the upcoming MTV Music Awards, which fell on August 29, 2002, Michael's 44th birthday, MTV wanted to present him with an Artist of the Millennium Award, an honor they had never bestowed before. When Michael first mentioned it to me, it sounded great. He was honored and excited about receiving such an award. Then I heard from a friend of mine at MTV that no such award existed. In reality, MTV had no plan to offer any such award to Michael. They were just going to bring him out to celebrate his birthday. When I told Michael what I'd heard, he called Trudy immediately. He put her on speaker so I could hear the conversation. Trudy told him that I didn't know what I was talking about, and she wondered what I was doing talking to MTV in the first place. If y'all wanted to make Michael look stupid as a wacky cool crazy stunt to boost your ratings, just say that. But let's not forget that the M in MTV stands for Michael, bitch. I mean, it might as well. And he saved y'all from bankruptcy back in 1995. Don't act like you forgot. At least according to his nephew Taj Jackson, son of Tito Jackson. And if you didn't clock that shade, put it in your fridge overnight like some chicken and let it marinate. I even heard that the award was up on the official MTV website and was yanked at the last minute to not only make Michael look bad, but to teach him a lesson because of all the Sony drama going on during this time. Alright, let me stop talking about this. But before I do, let me make sure that Kung Fu Panda is dead. Oh, Michael! Thank you. As if the media needed more fuel to add to the fire of making Michael's life insufferable, while at a hotel in Berlin, a crowd of fans wanted to see his newborn son. This was when MJ proceeded to show his infant son to his fans by holding him over the balcony of his hotel. But let's get several things straight. MJ was not going to drop him, and he had a death grip on that child. He was not a negligent parent, and he loved his children. And like I said, the media had a vendetta against MJ, and he stated that they slowed down the footage to make him look worse. But I'm gonna let MJ shut this down real quick.
I was holding that baby strong, hard, tight.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying, though.
And I know better. And I've seen people that flip their kids up in the air, do somersaults and catch them. And, I get caught at the moment, holding on tight. Just let them give a wave. And, but it happens for like 2 seconds. But when it gets on the news, they slow it down. They don't show the crowd. They make me look like I'm this eccentric idiot dangling his baby over a balcony like a nut.
And now we're moving on. I would personally deem 2003 the start of probably the toughest years of Michael Jackson's life. This is the year the infamous documentary by Martin Bashir. Man, I don't know why it keeps coming out like that. Anyway, this is the year the infamous documentary by Martin Bashir premiered, Living with Michael Jackson. The documentary was meant to show Michael Jackson to the public in a renewed and positive light, but instead it subsequently led to him being indicted on 9 counts, 7 for child molestation and 2 for administering intoxicating agents in the commission of a felony. This 9 would later be up to 14 total counts. And once again, for the girls in the balcony,
the girls in the balcony, I love you, you're wonderful.
This interview was manipulated and altered beyond belief to make Michael Jackson look very bad to the public. Behind the scenes, Mr. Bashir made MJ feel very comfortable, like he was on his side. He admired the way MJ was as a father and a human being, but once the documentary aired, it perpetuated every stereotype people already believed about MJ. That he was a freak, weird, had inappropriate relationships with children, and the fact that he felt the need to cover his kids' faces was too strange for words. Now with the rise of social media and more access to actual creeps and weirdos, when today's celebrities do it, it's accepted. But when MJ did it, it was strange. MJ was smart and had his own personal cameras rolling, and with this footage he released a follow-up documentary called Michael Jackson, The Footage You Were Never Meant to See, which totally debunked everything Bashir showed, but the damage was already done.
Now, I'm not saying that I saw any evidence of Michael Jackson being involved sexually with any children. Quite the contrary. But what I am saying is that children who are vulnerable should not be going into the house of a billionaire superstar where they sleep in his bed.
As we said, that was Bashir's comment heard on TV by millions of people.
But what did Bashir say to Michael Jackson about this day at Neverland? Let's take a look at the footage that was captured by Michael's camera, documenting the interviews.
The problem is, you see, nobody actually comes here and sees it. But I was here yesterday, and I saw it, and it's nothing short of a spiritually kind thing.
He does it all the time.
I know, but I've told him. I know.
A lot of people see it, but
they never talk about it, and I've said this to him, and what I've wanted to convey is those two things. And what we've had the privilege of doing this week is not only talking about the musical genius, but about what we saw yesterday, which was incredible.
As we know, the locals don't like the truth or to do their own research. Of course, though, in 2005, Martin Bashir had his hands involved in yet another documentary. In the United States, it aired as a primetime documentary called Michael Jackson's Secret World that was narrated by Bashir. This also conveniently aired in February 2005, right before the trial started. In the UK, it was called Michael Jackson's Boys and narrated by Mark Strong. It aired in January of 2005. The documentary focused on a supposed history of Michael Jackson's interest in boys. The US version aired a disclaimer saying that while some of the interviews in the British version received compensation, no payment had been rendered for the interviews in the additional hour of footage. Now sit here and tell me that there wasn't a hidden agenda to humiliate, torture, and destroy Michael Jackson, his reputation, and his legacy. The media had already made its own verdict before the man even stepped foot in that courtroom.
Certainly when I made the documentary, there was a small part of that which contained a controversy concerning his relationship with other young people. But the truth is that he was never convicted of any crime. I never saw any wrongdoing myself. And whilst his lifestyle may have been a bit unorthodox, I don't believe it was criminal. And I think the world has now lost the greatest entertainer it's probably ever known.
By the end of 2003, Michael surrendered himself to the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department, where he allegedly, I'm not trying to be sued, y'all, experienced police brutality, meaning any kind of unwarranted or excessive verbal or physical assault on a victim while a cop is on duty.
They manhandled me very roughly. My shoulder is dislocated, literally. It's hurting me very badly. I'm in pain all the time. See this arm? This is as far as I can reach it. Same with this side over here.
Because of what happened at the police station?
At the police station. And what they did to, if you saw what they did to my arms, it was very bad what they did. It was very swollen, I want to say.
But how
You'll see.
We were given this photograph said to be taken after Michael Jackson was released on bail. Jackson says the swelling above his wrist is where the police handcuffed him. How did they do it? I mean, what did they do?
With the handcuffs, the way they tied them too tight behind my back.
Behind your back?
Yeah, and they put it in a certain position knowing that it's going to hurt and affect my back. Now I can't move. It keeps me from sleeping at night. I can't sleep at night.
In an independent investigation, the California Attorney General's office concluded MJ was neither manhandled nor mistreated when he was taken into custody, though. Interesting. His Neverland ranch was also raided and completely destroyed. Having to go through this bullshit a second time couldn't have been easy for Michael, especially now that he had his children to worry about and look after. Of course, people questioned their custody, trying to say that he was committing these malicious, false crimes on his own children. And I can tell you right now that Michael Jackson would never be the same again after these next few years.
I love my community, and I have great faith in our justice system. Please keep an open mind and let me have my day in court. I deserve a fair trial like every other American citizen. I will be acquitted and vindicated when the truth is told. Thank you.
In the beginning of 2004, MJ had his arraignment. And this is basically the first time a criminal defendant appears in court and where they hear the charges against them and submit a plea. 5 accounts will be tacked on, totaling the 14. If MJ was convicted, he would have faced up to 18 years. He, of course, pleaded not guilty, as he should have, because he wasn't guilty argue with the wall. In 2005, day after day, MJ was subjected to go to court and listen to lies spewed on his name. You could see him physically start to break down. According to Michael's sister LaToya Jackson per her book, Starting Over, although the trial had not broken him, it had done grave damage. A crack had formed in his spirit. He had lost his will to fight. He had lost everything that at once sparkled and shone inside of him. It was almost as if he were lifeless, and he was adrift and quite lost. On June 13th, 2005, also known as Vindication Day in the MJ fandom, Michael was acquitted on all 14 counts against him. And if you're gonna come at me with that MJ is guilty BS, not only can you argue with the wall, you can stream Michael Jackson Square One here on YouTube and Amazon Prime, as well as listen to the Michael Jackson Case for Innocence podcast on all available streaming platforms. Not to mention to be on the lookout for the upcoming docu-series by Jin Chohan, Trial by Media. Go ahead and donate to his GoFundMe, y'all. And of course, Taj Jackson's docu-series, Rewriting History. Further information on all these wonderful fan-made sources will be available in the description and my source list. Educate yourselves, darlings. You gotta be in the know to know, you know? Thank you. After the trial ended, MJ got his passport back from the court and immediately fled the United States. When this is over, I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back, he would say to LaToya. This country has been cruel to me. I was born in this country, and they treat me so unfairly. He would spend the next year traveling with his children. According to Prince, Michael Jackson's eldest son, also known as Michael Jackson Jr., per his testimony in the Jackson vs. AEG trial in 2013, he states, I do know we went to Bahrain and Ireland, the Middle East area like Dubai. I remember staying in Aspen and New York for a little bit, and then to Vegas. Per LaToya's book, she claims that Michael kept his circle small during this time. Not even the family could get in contact with him, and that he didn't even have management. She says the kid's nanny, Grace Rwamba, was running the daily ins and outs, but I'm not exactly sure how true that is. Plus, during her deposition for the AEG trial in 2013, Paris Jackson, Michael's daughter, had said she was crazy or something, and that MJ tried sending her to India once to get away from her, and she kept coming back.
He sent her to like India, I think. He sent her to India to get some stuff. Keep coming back.
Right.
Ciao. However, I would like to add per Prince's testimony again in 2013 that he was unsure of why Paris would say that. His exact words were, after the death of my dad, we each had our own difficulties dealing with it. She's having a hard time right now. But I just saw her with Grace the other day, and they were happy. Of course, Grace was terminated at some point by Michael, but Prince didn't remember why. He just said that she had some personal problems that she had to deal with on her own. But eventually, Miss Catherine, the children's grandmother, did ask Grace to come back, and all the children were happy to see a familiar face. Around this time period, I believe this was when Paris tried to unalive herself, so I'm assuming the things she said in her deposition in regards to Grace were not true, but I wanted to put this in here so that people had the full tea. And of course, I am not attacking Paris. We love and we stand Paris Michael Catherine on this channel. Thank you. While in Bahrain, Michael was working with someone by the name of Prince Sheikh Abdullah, who was introduced to him by his brother Jermaine during the trial. According to his book, You Are Not Alone Through a Brother's Eyes, he states, the prince was producing a local artist, but was eager to expand not only a record label, but a leisure entertainment arm too. Michael had tried to do this with Kingdom Entertainment years earlier, and his vision for hotels, theme parks, and movies never tired. It represented the next level in a direction away from music. Also, after his experience of American Justice, he had been talking about finding sanctuary in the East with the children once the trial was over. The timing of everything presented an opportunity to bring together the prince and his wealth, and Michael and I as collaborators, and not only music, but movies. This was a win-win, but more important, a chance for him to get back on track. Of course, the work Prince Abdullah and MJ did went nowhere, and MJ soon ended up leaving Bahrain altogether after Abdullah did not want to continue to support him financially with no sort of return. This definitely would not bite him in the butt later or anything. No, sir. It was at this point Michael would decide to depart for Ireland. MJ loved living in Ireland because he was able to live pretty much a normal life there for a while. The media and paparazzi didn't hound him everywhere he went, and when they did, the locals would throw them off. There's stories that once locals discovered that Michael was staying at the lodge, they would send reporters the wrong way, and one farmer even threatened to empty his slurry trailer over the car of paparazzo that were following him. The people there respected him, his privacy, and the privacy of his children. He was also very into Irish history, music, and the culture as a whole. The whole country was a place that was tranquil for him, and he eventually wanted to buy a home there.
He was getting over the fact that the world had turned its back on him. The guy was fit, he was getting stronger, he was eating well. And then he says, I'm ready to start doing some music and meet and interact with musicians. And, you know, I reckon if he had lived here and stayed here, he obviously wouldn't have died. He would have continued to record, and he was getting stronger. And I think he was now going to come back out as he was to plan his return to the world stage.
Finally, the major event that happened before Michael returned to the United States would be the 2006 World Music Awards. And well, child, I'm gonna let investigative journalist Charles Thompson explain this one per episode 44 of the MJ Cast, linked in my source notes as always, darling.
The Mirror ran on its front page, "He's bad. Comeback disaster as Jacko booed off." The Daily Record headlined its story, "Really, really bad. Jacko booed off stage in first UK appearance for 10 years." It was not Michael Jackson's first UK appearance for 10 years. The story went on. Jackson scuttled off the stage after being booed by the crowd. This was a blatant lie. Michael had remained on stage for a long time, grinning widely as the audience showered him with deafening cheers. In my article, conjuring a chorus of boos, I wrote, "I was in complete disbelief. Had one rogue reporter claimed Michael Jackson was booed off stage, I wouldn't have been so angry. Every profession has its bad apples. But for multiple reporters to have attended an event at which Michael Jackson was demonstrably and categorically not booed off stage, and yet to all then write articles claiming that he was, demonstrated a clear conspiracy between multiple parties to fabricate and perpetuate a bogus story."
And all I personally want to say about this is that I bet Roberto Cavalli was somewhere screaming, crying, and throwing up, because wasn't that jacket like $20,000? Michael, you really out of control, huh? Michael Jackson's reputation post-trial was irreparably damaged. The general public had turned on him even more so than after the settlement of the first trial in 1993. Of course, this was more prevalent in the United States, as people around the world seemed to never lose that love for him. Even his own colleagues within the industry, ones he considered his close friends, had also turned on him. I imagine he felt heartbroken, isolated, and completely hated by a world that once screamed his name with love and adulation. But of course, MJ wasn't a person to let things get him down and always tried to persevere. He would spend years working in the studio, always in talks of crafting this huge comeback. One could assume that MJ had some slight hesitation about coming back into the public eye. As with everything he did, the media manipulated it to fit its own personal narrative. The years following his return to the United States in December of 2006 were spent hopping from home to home. Randy Phillips, CEO and president of AEG Live during This Is It, testified in 2011 during the Conrad Murray trial that Michael's primary reason for agreeing to the tour was that
he wanted to finally settle down and get a really, really good home for the kids and for his family. So they weren't, in his words, living like vagabonds. That's what he said to me.
Everything about Randy Phillips's character is extremely unsavory, to say the least. But I believe what he said to be true. Michael tried to keep his children's safety and well-being first in everything he did. Of course, there were other aspects of the tour that enticed him. One of those is the financial gains, because as you're about to find out, after years of litigation and public scrutiny, money was something Michael desperately needed. Michael Jackson was a billion-dollar enterprise, running 24/7, and there was nobody in charge. There was no organization, no actual company, just different people in different pockets, all jockeying for different agendas. He didn't even have an office. His office was wherever he stood at. His business phone was whatever phone you put in his hand. Didn't even have an email address.
But money is the root of all evil, as you know. The love of money is the root of all evil.
Now I know what you're probably thinking. Michael Jackson, in need of cash? That just seems unrealistic. This man owned half the Sony ATV catalog. You know, the one containing the rights to songs in various artist discographies, including Elvis Presley, Sly and the Family Stone,
Mr. Eminem,
and most famously, the Beatles. Not to mention Michael's own songs in his catalog, My Jack. And what about his various assets? His rare collectibles? His homes? Havenhurst and Neverland? Surely his debt was exaggerated as another attempt to assassinate his character. Right? I mean, he was out here writing checks for $500 million.
I'm in an incredible financial situation. I just wrote somebody a check for $500 million.
Okay, let's just be honest. Let's just be real. When it came to Michael Jackson's finances, well, the bar was in hell, sis. He had been on a slow and steady financial decline since probably the early 1990s. His Sony ATV catalog was honestly the only thing keeping him afloat throughout the early 2000s. And even then, the problem with that is his share of the Sony ATV catalog generated about $25 million a year, whereas his living expenses were double that. And as the kids say, the math was certainly not mathing. And Michael was what you would call asset rich, but money poor. In this section, we're going to be discussing Michael Jackson's finances, because for him to get to the point where he agreed to do the This Is It tour after decades of expressing his disdain for touring and dodging his responsibilities like the bubonic plague, I said what I said. It meant that he was in some deep sugar honey iced tea. To keep things simple, we're only going to be talking about MJ's finances from the start of the new millennium up until his decision to embark on the This Is It tour. So that's about the years 2000 to 2008. I'd also like to add that we need to be realistic here. Michael's my man, and I'ma stick beside him, but throughout the 2000s, there were a lot of empty promises, broken contracts leading to numerous litigations, pointless shopping sprees, and just him being a big, stupid idiot with money. LOVE though. Michael started off the new millennium hot by being sued by concert promoter Marcel Avram for $21 million for the cancellation of 2 concerts he was supposed to perform in Hawaii and Australia on New Year's 1999, the Millennium Concerts. The cancellation of these shows costed Michael $5.3 million. But of course this wasn't resolved until 2003. And why did he cancel them? Well, per Making Michael, engineer Michael Prince said that MJ was worried about the Millennium Bug, a computer problem that threatened the operations of business, finance, government agencies, and science. The fear was that on the stroke of midnight between December 31st, 1999, all computers had the potential of shutting down, although few problems actually arose. MJ, please be for real, babe. Although I feel like there may have potentially been other reasons for their cancellation outside of that. I've heard that the huge costs of the 2 MJ and Friends concerts eventually diminished any profits that were meant, as that agreement specified, to go straight to charity organizations. So Marcel Avram's company gave that money to those charity organizations in the hopes of regaining profits from those 2 planned Millennium concerts. There was also the fact that MJ was a new father. With Prince being born in 1997 and Paris being born in 1998, he was actively still going through his divorce with Debbie Rowe, and perhaps those shows could have been too much for him because of all those factors, but also the fact that while doing the MJ and Friends concerts, there was a bridge collapse incident, which we'll talk about a little later, that left him with chronic back pain. MJ could have also potentially wanted to shift his focus strictly to his upcoming album. Throughout the rest of the year 2000 and most of 2001, Michael was working on what would be his final studio album recorded during his lifetime, Invincible. This album, of course, he had been working on since 1997, and at this point was just becoming a money pit for Sony. Invincible has been dubbed as the most expensive album ever made, costing $30 million. When the album finally came out in October of 2001, it did not do as well as Michael or his record label had hoped. To be honest, he needed this album to be a hit, since by this time he was nearly $231 million in debt from borrowing loans from Bank of America throughout the 1990s, most of which went to funding his lifestyle, but also his creative endeavors, which would have been fine and dandy if MJ was generating the income to do this type of thing and could expect a huge return like earlier in his career. I mean, no sun visor, sis. He was also using his 50% share of the Sony ATV catalog as well as the catalog containing his own songs, My Jack, as collateral, meaning something pledged as security for repayment of a loan or to be forfeited in the event of a default. Not to mention he owed Sony for personal advances, recording costs, album promotion, and the cost to remaster his old albums. Ooh, child. The quote-unquote flop of Invincible was due in part to several factors. The main one being that the girls were fighting behind the scenes. I'm talking they were throwing tables and chairs out here. Michael was pissed off because of the budget Sony allotted for the short films, and Sony basically told Michael to suck it up because to them, short films didn't matter for promotion. But touring did. MJ initially agreed to tour America and Europe in the spring of 2002, but backed out of doing an Invincible tour, not only because of his own disdain for touring, which again we'll get into throughout the series, but also because of the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. And Tohme Tohme, CEO of Sony Music during this time, was big mad. Sources say he was punching the air, screaming, crying, and dare I say throwing up, despite other artists doing the exact same thing. The cancellation of the Invincible tour had cost MJ about $100 million. But I mean, MJ did end up going on an Invincible tour. Just not the one that Tohme Tohme had hoped for.
I'm not supposed to say what I'm gonna say right now, but I have to let you in on a secret.
Say it.
So, please don't videotape what I'm going to say, okay? Turn that off, please. No, what? I don't mind. Tape it. I didn't say Sony was racist. I said Tohme Tohme is racist.
Who's the head of Sony?
Yeah, Tohme Tohme.
He's a mean, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
And Tohme Tohme is a devil.
For someone that went through hell touring,
I go through hell. I go through hell tour.
Michael Jackson's Invincible tour lasted a good bit into 2002. On top of this, he was still facing several litigations. To quote a CNN article from July 29, 2002 titled, "Michael Jackson May Face a Cash Crunch, Pop Goes the King," for Jackson, the Sony squabble is only the latest in a growing list of business headaches. He faces several lawsuits, including one for $12 million in allegedly unpaid fees by a South Korean financial management company that claims it arranged $200 million in loans for Jackson from 1998 to 2000. The company is seeking a court order to freeze Jackson's Neverland assets. Michael Jackson was and is a ticking financial time bomb waiting to explode at any moment, the suit charges. It continues on, stating that gradually, Jackson's misadventures are putting the squeeze on his wallet. The singer has assets of more than $800 million and may have about $200 million in debts. According to one source, if that's accurate, relatively little of Jackson's fortune is liquid, even though he is far from broke and he dreads the possibility of having to part with any of his prized possessions. So, at this point, it would seem like Michael's finances weren't as bad as they were going to get, and maybe there was hope if he could manage to clean up his reputation and end his shenanigans with Sony. But you know what they say about shenanigans. If you shenan once, you're going to shenan again.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
That's when British journalist Martin, well, you know his name, would enter the chat and begin filming his documentary Living with Michael Jackson at Neverland, which, as I previously discussed, was supposed to show Michael in a renewed and positive light. And well,
I promise you, the best is yet to come.
Of course did the exact opposite. Now, as we enter the trial years, Michael Jackson's financial struggles became public knowledge. Why, you ask? Well, as Linton Guest put it in his book, The Trials of Michael Jackson, he states, the prosecution sought to introduce the state of Jackson's money problems at every turn before the trial and during the proceedings. They claimed that Michael Jackson was, to all intents and purposes, bankrupt. The reason they gave for their concentration on this point was that, if it were true, it provided a motive for Jackson to have given the broadcaster Martin Bashir virtually unlimited had access to his life. The prosecution line was that Jackson needed money following a downturn in his record sales in the 1990s. Bashir, through the proposed television documentary Living with Michael Jackson, offered the prospect of bringing the fading star back into the public eye, thereby helping Jackson generate vast amounts of cash once again. This, they said, was the pivotal event which precipitated the abuse of Gavin Arvizo. In an interview with Jesse Jackson in March of 2005, Jesse had asked Michael if he was broke, since this point was brought up repeatedly, to which he said,
"The focus of the trial to saying you are broke, and last week people calling in all around the nation saying, is Michael broke? Michael, are you broke?"
That's not true at all. It's just one of their many schemes to embarrass me and to just drag me through mud. And it's the same pattern like I told you with these other people in the past. It's the same pattern. So don't believe any of this, this is tabloid, sensationalized kind of gossip.
I believe Michael is right when he says it's gossip, solely because what does the amount of money he has have to do with his innocence in a trial that is about whether he sexually abused a child or not? It's kind of irrelevant to that. And Michael knew how to work the media. If he wanted to, he could have chosen to do anything to bring himself back into the spotlight. He chose to do this Bullshit documentary because of the things he was promised. Bullshit just made him look god-awful. Not to mention, regardless of the amount of money MJ got for the interview or the rebuttal he made, Michael Jackson, the footage you were never meant to see, I seriously doubt Fox was going to offer him enough to get out of the financial hole that he was in. But Michael was in deep financial trouble, whether he wanted to admit that publicly or not. He wasn't broke, but he was growing broke. No tea, no shade, no pink lemonade. As Jermaine Jackson put it, his focus had to be on clearing his name for 18 months, not making music, and that pushed him further into debt, especially after the cancellation of the Invincible tour had cost him at least $100 million. Meanwhile, his bank loan had risen with interest to $272 million, and Neverland cost $1 million a month to run, which didn't include payments on a $23 million line of credit taken out against the ranch. On top of all of this, there was also the influx of civil lawsuits against him, some coming from ex-employees and various ex-colleagues turned enemies. Of course, this was nothing new in the world of Michael Jackson, but some of these employees had also stolen from him and were having seconds and thirds of expensive items purchased in Michael's name sent to their homes. Some of these employees even testified during the trial. To quote Charles Thompson's Huffington Post article, one of the most shameful episodes in journalistic history, a parade of disgruntled security guards and housekeepers took to the stand to testify that they had witnessed molestation. Moreover, it was revealed that each of these former employees had been fired by Jackson for stealing from his property or had lost a wrongful termination suit and wound up owing Jackson huge amounts of money. They'd also neglected to tell the police when they supposedly witnessed this molestation, even when questioned in connection with Jordy Chandler's 1993 allegations, but subsequently tried to sell stories to the press, sometimes successfully. The more money on the table, the more salacious the allegations became. And it's like Michael Jackson once said, anything for money. Throughout 2004 and the first half of 2005, MJ fought for his innocence, and on June 13, 2005, he was acquitted on all 14 charges against him. Acquitted! That one was for the girls on the balcony. They're really hard at hearing. It would be at this point he would decide to leave the United States and depart for Bahrain to attempt to restart his career in the kingdom with the help of Prince Abdullah, whom he met through Jermaine Jackson. Little did Prince Abdullah know he'd be essentially just funding Michael's lifestyle. To quote Mike Smallcomb's book Making Michael, during the trial, Abdullah agreed to pay Michael's utility fees for Neverland and even footed the $2.2 million legal bill at the end of it. When the Jackson clan arrived in Bahrain, the Sheikh put them up in a luxury palace and paid for transport, security, guests, and even vacations to Europe. Over the course of nearly a year, he shelled out more than $7 million on Michael. But it wasn't merely a gift. In return for this huge advance, Michael had to relaunch his career in the kingdom. A lover of music, Abdullah was keen to expand his new record label, 2C's Records, and had cash to burn. I saw the payment as an investment in Michael's potential, the Sheikh said. He said he would pay me back through our work together. Allegedly, they had plans to do a Cirque du Soleil show together based on MJ's music, at least 2 albums, an autobiography, and even a documentary series on his life. Abdullah apparently secured the agreements in a binding contract. Even MJ's former collaborators were flying to Bahrain during this time to work with him, like Bill Bottrell and John Barnes, and several producers, such as John Legend. Oh, you mean this John Legend? That bitch that had a lot to say about Michael Jackson in the press? What's good, Arthur Reed? At some point, Michael would just end up hee-heeing into the wind. It honestly didn't seem like he was very motivated to fulfill any of the promises he and Abdullah had discussed, especially since he was already getting everything he wanted, not to mention he was also being sued by his former advisors Mark Schaffel and Dieter Wiesner. But we can blame some of this on his brother Randy Jackson, who was pretty much running Michael's finances and daily operations throughout 2004, during the height of the trial era. Since it's been alleged that Randy had stopped payments to both of them, there was also tea that in 2005 Michael's Neverland operating accounts had run dry, and the funds were mysteriously missing. Rumors flew that since Randy had taken over operations, he had bought himself a penthouse in Miami and had one of Michael's Bentleys removed from Neverland and placed it in the Miami penthouse. Rumors also flew that Michael was furious over the missing money and that Randy was making deals behind his back.
The Jackson family, they lived in a ghetto in Gary, Indiana, and they made it. They're so tight-knit, my ass.
But again, these were just rumors, not facts. Then there was the impending bankruptcy side plot going on around Christmas 2005. Since MJ missed so many payments on those Bank of America loans due to having insufficient funds to pay them.
Insufficient funds, you ain't got no money. Woo.
They had ended up selling said loans to Fortress Investment Group, an investment company that buys distressed debt. By early 2006, Michael was in $300 million of debt and somewhere screaming, crying, and throwing up. And if he wasn't, he was about to be, because as part of a refinancing deal, MJ had to sell half of his 50% stake in Sony ATV, which was allegedly valued at $1 billion. He was urged to sell this 25% to avoid bankruptcy. Sony actually made an official press release about it, stating, "Michael Jackson is pleased to announce that he has restructured his finances with the assistance of Sony Corporation of America, the longtime co-owner of Sony ATV Music Publishing LLC. Following negotiations with several leading financial institutions, Mr. Jackson has concluded refinancing with affiliates of Fortress Investment Group, the lender that currently holds secured debts that were previously held by Bank of America. Citigroup structured the transaction for the parties. The terms of this new financing deal will not be disclosed." Per Mike Smallcomb's book, Making Michael, Sony found a lender, Citigroup, but Fortress agreed to match the offer and refinance the $300 million debt, which was collateralized by Michael's 50% share in the Sony ATV catalog. Fortress also provided a separate loan of $23 million, leveraged by the Neverland Ranch, increasing the total debt to $325 million. The refinancing wouldn't provide Michael with much spare cash, though. As part of the package, he was forced to spend around $15 million buying back a 5% interest in the Sony ATV catalog he had given his attorney John Branca in 1993 as a condition of his return. It would also be around this time that Raymond Bain would become MJ's general manager and president/chief operating officer of a new company formed to handle his personal and business affairs, the Michael Jackson Company, even though she had no established history managing musicians at this point. Besides, she ended up being added to the list of people that sued Michael Jackson too, but that didn't happen until May of 2009. It's like Javon Beard, one of MJ's former security guards, said, "People usually sue when they think they can get something, and everybody knew that if you sued Michael Jackson, you'd get a settlement. He challenged the frivolous ones, like the paternity nonsense. He'd get those thrown out. But if you had any kind of claim that could justify going to trial, he'd just pay you to go away. Because after what he went through in 2005, he was never going to set foot in a courtroom again." Once Raymond stepped in as MJ's official general manager, she had done what she called sweeping organizational changes, and even put out this statement in August of 2006 about MJ being forced into bankruptcy, though she refused to name names or say who provided said documents to MJ per her statement we're about to read. For immediate release, August 7th, 2006. Conspiracy to force Michael Jackson into bankruptcy revealed. In what could be one of the biggest conspiracies in entertainment history, documents have been sent to Michael Jackson and his representatives, which reveal a deliberate plan by some former attorneys as well as associates and advisors to force Mr. Jackson into involuntary bankruptcy. The documents reveal that former attorneys actively solicited other attorneys, vendors, and creditors to join in a petition to place the client in involuntary bankruptcy. Mr. Jackson, who on June 27, 2006 announced sweeping organizational changes, has instructed his legal team to investigate and file claims against those responsible for conspiracy, bad faith, and self-dealing. These efforts may also result in civil and/or criminal charges, where appropriate. In addition, there is a strong possibility that these documents will be forwarded to the U.S. Attorney General for review and possible involvement. Mr. Jackson is neither shocked or surprised by these revelations, says Raymond K. Bain, Michael Jackson's general manager. Based on the timing of events that have impacted his personal and professional life in recent years, he has long been suspicious that some of those whom he entrusted to act on his behalf and to advise him with respect to his personal and business affairs may not have always acted in his best interests. I suppose anything is possible in the world of Michael Jackson. I just don't trust Raymond Bain, to be 100% honest with you. And that's on allegedly rented herself a nice luxury apartment on Michael Jackson's dime without him knowing, according to Bill and Javon's book. Tea shade and an abundance of pink lemonade says.
I'm always writing. I never stop.
Now, all we've talked about up to this point is Michael's finances. Obviously. But we haven't discussed a plan MJ had to get out of his debt, like a solid plan. I mean, he said he never stopped working in that interview with Entertainment Tonight I just showed, so where was any of that material? Of course, that specific material I believe could have been for Thriller 25, or will.i.am has kept it in his personal archive since Michael's death. What about the song for the victims of Hurricane Katrina? The alleged 7 album? My point is that year after year, the same thing kept happening. Countless lawsuits, shopping sprees, MJ moving from place to place, and him continuing to try to live a life sustained on borrowing. J. Randy Taraborelli said it best in his book, Michael Jackson, The Magic, the Madness, the Whole Story, when he said, and before I even say the quote, put the pitchforks and the torches down, because I know y'all love to hate this book and this man, but let me cook. In my view, Michael Jackson had a golden opportunity to reclaim his career after the trial. I couldn't understand why he wanted to blow it on such an epic scale. He kept promising records that never came out, dates that never materialized. He seemed to not have a place to live. He and his children would live with friends in one city and then migrate to another as if they were homeless. I didn't want to know anything about any of it. It all seemed so disappointing and useless to me. Looking back on it now, I wish I'd had more sympathy for a man so clearly in pain. He never got over the trial. That trauma was still eating away at him. I understand that now. How could he care about anyone else when he was just trying to get through the day himself? I feel like me presenting this information makes it seem like I'm painting Michael as this guy that was just careless to be careless, but he died spiritually way before he died physically. And I just don't think any of it mattered to him anymore. Like, any of it. I believe he loved the process of creating, but perhaps he didn't want to release anything anymore because he lost his confidence. He literally forgot he was Michael effing Jackson. I believe there was this immense pressure, not only from himself, but from the general public to come back and release something better and bigger than Thriller. How could he do that? Like, honestly, how could he top himself? As we start to dive into This Is It, you'll start to see MJ in some ways trying to capture his own magic again. But just like BoJack Horseman, Michael at this point was a Xerox of a Xerox, a copy of a copy, becoming more distorted, askew, and fuzzier each time portions of his life went up in flames, and he was forced to be an adult and fix them, when the deeper part of him just wanted to be done and left alone. The thing that separates these next few years from previous ones is that I feel like Michael finally got the wake-up call he needed, but at an unfortunate expense. The one thing we haven't touched on is Neverland. During the trial years, it was raided by over 70 police officers, and from that moment on, MJ vowed to never live there again.
And they had 80 policemen in this room, 80 policemen in one bedroom. That's really overdoing it. And they took knives and cut open my mattresses with knives. Just cut everything open. I've been back there, but not in my bedroom. I won't live there ever again. I'll visit Neverland. It's a house now. It's not a home anymore. I'll only visit there.
But just because he vowed to never live there again doesn't mean it all just went away. So what happened to it? Well, remember, Neverland was a fully staffed operation with amusement parks, rides, and animals, both of which needed regular maintenance and care. Not to mention the utility bills, which at some point Prince Abdullah had helped pay for, and will also, just casually add him to the list of people that eventually ended up suing Michael Jackson. There we go. Okay. Michael didn't want to have to sell the property, but in March 2006, the California State Labor Commission did make him shut it down and banned any activity from taking place there. The commission acted because Neverland's employees were not being paid. Michael was ordered to pay $69,000 in fines for allowing his insurance to lapse, plus $100,000 in fines for not paying his employees, and $306,000 for the 3 months' wages of 69 of his employees. Not to mention, MJ had taken out that $23 million line of credit against the ranch back in 2006 that was accumulating interest this whole time. Now in 2007, it was rumored that Neverland was headed for foreclosure, so Ramon went into damage control and released a statement. For immediate release, contact Ramon K. Bain, Neverland Valley Ranch, Washington, D.C. In 2006, Mr. Jackson's former advisors refinanced Neverland Valley Ranch through Fortress Investment Group, LLC. The loan matured in October 2007. Contrary to published reports, Mr. Jackson was never in default of the loan. Mr. Jackson is in the final stages of refinance and will not lose Neverland Valley Ranch. No further comments will be made regarding this subject, as it has been our long-term policy not to address Mr. Jackson's personal financial affairs. Oh yeah, Ramon also got terminated as MJ's manager this year. In 2008, according to Michael's brother Jermaine, out of nowhere, news broke that the lender was to foreclose the $23 million debt on Neverland because my brother was way behind on his payments. The idea that the ranch was under threat made me feel sick. I watched reports on television and read newspapers over the following days, then said to Halima, "Over my dead body, are any of those bankers going to sell Neverland?" It seemed like the only way out for Michael was to sell his $500 million share in the music catalog. My mind went into overdrive, worrying about something I couldn't control, until a thought flashed in my head. Dr. Tohme Tohme. Now, Dr. Tohme Tohme is a name you're going to hear a lot as the tale of This Is It unravels, so remember him. But for the purposes of this section, all you need to know right now is that Jermaine introduced Michael to Tohme because he thought he would be able to help save Neverland since he was a businessman in real estate and had connections. Tohme had an associate named Tom Barrick at an investment firm called Colony Capital, which specialized in buying and selling distressed properties. Tom Barrick then paid the $23 million in exchange for 50% ownership of Neverland, and from there, Tohme was appointed Michael's manager around June 2008. Apparently, Tom Barrick was also the one to finally convince Michael he had to go back on tour, and even introduced him to Phil Anschutz, owner of AEG, who then put Barrick in touch with AEG Live's then CEO/president, Randy Phillips, who then subsequently negotiated, along with Tohme, the details for MJ's ill-fated comeback tour, This Is It. And I assume this was after Randy's failed attempt to negotiate a tour with MJ in like 2007. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me not start talking my sugar honey iced tea. The bottom line is that Michael was in such financial turmoil that he couldn't avoid not working anymore. As I said earlier, he was living a life sustained on borrowing, and it would be unrealistic for him to continue to live that way. Up until this point, MJ had dodged any and all attempts to do a tour. He just didn't have that in him anymore. He had told multiple people he did not want to be performing Billie Jean at the age of 50. And what's sad is that Michael spent the last decade of his life trying to escape debt, only to become one of the top 10 highest paid deceased celebrities for a while, and the #1 highest paid deceased celebrity for within the last decade of his death. But being a musician and an entertainer is the path that he chose. So Michael, why were you so against going on tour?
Because it'll kill me. I'm going to go back probably 8 years ago. And Michael told me, Cory, I can't tour anymore. I'm not going to tour anymore. Okay? And I said, why, Mike? He said, because it'll kill me. That's what he said to me. He said, it'll kill me. I said, well, why would you say something like that? He said, well, he said, remember when I was preparing for my concert and I passed out at the Sony studio? He said, well, it's because when I get ready for a tour, I get dehydrated. I don't eat. I don't drink. I don't sleep. I put so much of myself into preparing for a tour that he said, I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just something that I don't even think about anymore. You understand? I've just become so driven that I can't even think about these other things anymore. He said, they made me walk around with an IV last time. He said, so I just decided, my doctors all decided that maybe you shouldn't do this anymore.
What you just heard is audio from the former senior vice president of Sony Music, Cory Rooney. Cory Rooney and Michael Jackson had met around the end of the 1990s during the production of the Invincible album. The two had worked on a song together written by Rooney called She Was Loving Me. Eventually, the title was later changed to Chicago and released on Michael's second posthumous album, Escape, in 2014. Even throughout Michael's, Invincible tour, the two of them remained close, with the last time they spoke being in late 2008. He truly considered Rooney to be one of his only true allies at Sony. To quote Michael Jackson, Songs and Stories from the Vault by Damian Shields, and because of Rooney's close working relationship with Mottola, all kinds of rumors began to swirl, including allegations that Rooney was acting as Mottola's personal spy. Such rumors were completely untrue, according to Rooney, who tells that Jackson pleaded with him to not let the media and the agenda-driven record executive ruin their friendship. Michael reached out to me personally and said, Cory, do not let these people do to us and our friendship what they do to everyone else. So, let's all take a moment to fully digest what he said in regards to Michael not wanting to tour anymore, because MJ had to have felt backed into a corner to agree to do something that would kill him. In this section, we'll be discussing Michael's solo tours, various one-off shows, and the toll touring really had on his body. By doing this, we'll be able to have a better idea of exactly why in some ways This Is It was doomed from the start.
The record company usually like for you to support your album and go on tour. And I don't like to.
Well, can we just do it again without the negative saying that you don't like the tour?
I don't like it though.
I know, but
I go through hell. I go through hell tours.
Let's start with the bad tour. Although I first want to address that obviously, Michael's experience with touring didn't begin here. He had been performing and touring since he was a child with his brothers, including Jermaine.
Also, I'd like to thank all my brothers who I love very dearly, including Jermaine.
In the group, the Jackson 5. So, by the time the Bad Tour started in 1987, there was already a lot of speculation about him retiring. Jermaine Jackson has claimed Michael talked about not touring anymore as far back as 1981, and this would be prior to the Victory Tour and any of MJ's solo ventures. He had a strong desire to pursue filmmaking and maybe even acting. This dream never retired, but it unfortunately never truly got to come to full fruition. Please don't put that Miss Castaway clip in here.
If you do not destroy the Ark, then mankind will pay dearly for the consequences.
Can you teach me how to moonwalk?
Of course, MJ was always low-key talking his little sugar honey iced tea, saying something was going to be his last or final thing, and he would come back with something unexpected.
Aren't you going to miss this kind of thing? That energy, the audience is going crazy out there. How are you going to stay away from it?
I don't know. It is my last one.
Are you really never going to do another one?
No.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
I mean, the man did do 2 more tours after this. Anyway, the Bad Tour was 16 months long, 123 shows, and lasted from 1987 to 1989. It would go on to be his longest solo tour, with his next two having 69 and 82 shows respectively. Somewhat of a drastic decrease with a lot more cancelled shows. The Bad Tour only had about 10 to 11 cancelled shows, most of which were due to unknown reasons or Michael having laryngitis. This would become a recurring problem for him throughout later tours, and of course is fairly common among singers as they tend to overuse their voices singing loudly for long periods of time. This is also a common side effect of having your microphone turned on while singing. A concept, of course, not a lot of y'all's faves can grasp, and a concept some of y'all's faves should never grasp. And before you try to clock him for lip syncing on future tours, that's not what this video is about. I'm inclined to believe that this tour was the only one of his solo tours where he was not under the influence of anything. According to Karen Fay, MJ's makeup artist, per her AEG trial testimony, in the beginning when they first started out, shows would be scheduled out far enough apart where MJ had a chance to unwind and sleep. Therefore, he wouldn't need to utilize sleeping pills or strong opioids like he would on later tours. During this time, I feel like he was still very straight edge, meaning he had a way of life that didn't involve anything to be considered unhealthy or immoral. No recreational drugs, drinking, smoking, or promiscuous sex. These ideals are very in line with the Jehovah's Witness background he was raised on. Of course, he went on to disassociate himself from the religion in 1987 due to constantly being criticized for being too worldly. But I still feel like he identified with its core values for a while thereafter, to the point where his sister LaToya claimed Michael wouldn't even so much as take some Tylenol if he had a headache. However, MJ very well could have been on something, and it just may not have become a problem yet. The Pepsi incident, where he suffered major burns to his scalp while shooting a commercial, would be a few years behind him at this point, but he was still undergoing surgeries and various treatments for years after the fact. In his 1988 autobiography Moonwalk, he discusses his feelings about drugs during this time period and strongly discourages the use of them. A lot of children in the entertainment business ended up doing drugs and destroying themselves. Frankie Lyman, Bobby Driscoll, any of a number of child stars, and I can understand their turning to drugs considering the enormous stresses put upon at a young age. It's a difficult life. Very few manage to maintain any semblance of a normal childhood. I myself have never even tried drugs. No marijuana, no cocaine, nothing. I mean, I haven't even tried these things. Forget it. This isn't to say we were never tempted. We were musicians doing business during an era when drug use was common. I don't mean to be judgmental. It's not even a moral issue for me. But I've seen drugs destroy too many lives to think they're anything to fool with. I'm certainly no angel, and I may have my own bad habits, but drugs aren't among them. Of course, he mainly referenced recreational drugs. During this time period, I don't think he fully understood the dangers of prescription drugs and how they can be just as bad, if not worse, than recreational drugs. He was someone that was very trusting of doctors and believed that because they took an oath to do no harm, they truly wouldn't.
A doctor has an obligation, a solemn obligation, to first do no harm to their patient. Conrad Murray violated that sacred trust each and every day.
His next tour, the Dangerous Tour, would end abruptly due to him going into rehab for drug addiction. But before I talk about that, I'd like to take a quick segue to talk about lupus. I'm taking the time to talk about this because I feel like a lot of people don't consider it a factor when discussing Michael's stamina, performing ability, and recovery. That's mainly because I don't believe it was ever truly known if Michael had systemic lupus or just discoid lupus. But for the purposes of this segue, I'm going to assume that he could have suffered from both. Lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease that causes the body's immune system to attack its own healthy tissues and organs. This in turn can cause a wide range of symptoms throughout a person's body, including inflammation, bouts of pain, and organ damage, specifically to the lungs, joints, kidneys, skin, and heart. Most people think of actress/singer Selena Gomez when they think of lupus, as she's been public about her struggles with it and even had to undergo a kidney transplant. Other celebrities like Nick Cannon and Toni Braxton have been diagnosed with lupus as well. It's a very serious thing that tends to be more common in African Americans, Hispanics, and Asian Americans. Although there is no cure for the disease, certain lifestyle modifications along with immunosuppressants or steroids can be prescribed to help symptoms and ease flare-ups. According to Michael's longtime dermatologist, Dr. Arnold Klein, MJ started showing early signs of systemic lupus erythematosus, or SLE, a little bit after Thriller around 1983-1984. Those early signs being the signature butterfly rash as shown here. Because of Klein's ability to diagnose MJ when no one else could, this would start a friendship between the two of them that lasted until Michael's death in 2009.
Met Michael because someone had brought him into my office. I walked into the room with Michael, and I took one look at him. I said, "You have lupus erythematosus." Now, this was a long word.
Lupus?
Lupus, yes. I mean, because he had red butterfly rash, and he also had severe crusting you could see on the anterior portion of his scalp. He had this terrible thing wrong with his skin. So I said, you have thick crusting of your scalp, and you have some hair loss. He said, well, how do you know this? I said, because the natural course of lupus. So I then did a biopsy. I diagnosed lupus, and then our relationship went from there.
Ironically, this would also be the time when Michael cited his vitiligo started, sometime after Off the Wall / Thriller. And for the girls in the balcony, vitiligo is a disease that takes away the pigmentation of the skin, and people with vitiligo are more likely to have lupus than someone without it. About 20% of people with vitiligo also have a different autoimmune disease. I believe MJ also suffered from CLE, or discoid lupus, which primarily affects the skin. MJ's discoid lupus was primarily on his scalp around where he was burned during the Pepsi commercial in 1984. It is possible for a person to have both discoid and systemic lupus, or for the discoid lupus to manifest into systemic lupus, as 20% of SLE patients present with skin findings first. Now, the main difference between the two is that systemic lupus causes effects on the internal organs and only mildly affects the skin, whereas discoid lupus doesn't affect the internal organs, but the rash tends to be more severe. From what I've gathered, at some point, Michael's lupus went into remission, and he wasn't receiving any kind of treatment for it at the time of his death. However, that doesn't mean it already didn't cause damage to his internal organs. If we look at his autopsy, his lungs had long-standing abnormalities. They were both inflamed with bronchiolitis, basically just a viral infection, which can cause swelling, irritation, and buildup of mucus in the small airways of the lungs. He also had chronic interstitial pneumonitis, meaning scarring of the lungs, which can make it difficult to breathe and make someone easily fatigued. Yet, he was still expected to perform and exert himself at rehearsals and on stage in London. That's tea. Of course, the anesthetic drug that Michael used as a sleep aid, Diprivan, also known as propofol, can cause breathing issues and potentially could have damaged his lungs after years of casual use during tour cycles and before major performances. But I'm not a doctor, and could be very wrong about this. Anyway, lupus can explain a lot of Michael's health issues and specifically the issues he would have on tour. It can cause insomnia, adrenaline spikes, weight loss, and fatigue. The stress from touring alone could have caused MJ to have a lupus flare-up, as emotional stress, overworking, and exhaustion can trigger flare-ups. Longtime fan and author of a real-life fairy tale, Michael Jackson and Me, Talitha Linehand was a daily presence around him during his final years, and had stated Michael exhibited signs of something called lupus fog, which is a general name for the cognitive impairments that often appear with lupus, including concentration problems, memory problems, confusion, and difficulty expressing yourself. Things like alcohol consumption combined with medications can make lupus fog even worse. She explains this phenomenon in MJcast episode 129, the Talitha Linehand special.
I talked to Michael very briefly outside Carlwood on his return from the forum, and I told him that my friend had left. I'd relayed a message from my friend to Michael, and Michael just was staring at me and not really understanding what I was saying. He kept repeating my words back to me, and he just seemed really incoherent, and I couldn't understand why. If he'd been like this coming out of the doctor's office, I would have thought oh, he's sedated, but I didn't understand why he was being so incoherent. Now I understand he was probably going through a lupus fog, it's called. It's when he was probably going through a lupus flare-up, which causes this kind of state of incoherency, which is a state that's brought on by severe stress and by insomnia.
Frank Cassio had stated a similar instance in his book, My Friend Michael, where Michael seemed fine one moment, and then, out of the blue, became sort of dazed. In Santiago, there was an incident in the hotel's hot tub. Eddie, Michael, and I were soaking in the hot tub, maybe playing around and seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. All of a sudden, Michael said, "I'm going to hold my breath," and slipped under the water. Time went by. More time went by. At first, I could see the bubbles rising from his nose. Then, there were no more bubbles. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I dove down and pulled Michael up to the surface. I said, "Applehead, are you okay?" He was conscious, but kind of out of it. "Yeah, I don't know what happened," he replied. "I must have fallen asleep." This may sound strange, but despite the way it may seem, I'm almost certain he wasn't on drugs. Over the many years I knew him, I had a chance to develop a pretty good idea of when he was on something and when he wasn't. And in retrospect, I really think that in this instance, he was sober. Let's keep in mind that this instance occurred while Michael was on the Dangerous tour, or just around that 92-93 time period in general. So, he very well could have been under the influence of something, and with Frank being sort of young at the time, maybe he wouldn't have been able to realize that. But he stated he believed Michael was sober, and if we believe that, then the possibility of him experiencing lupus fog fits. Of course, this is just a theory. LOVE, y'all. LOVE. Anyway, I will say that lupus is not officially in Michael Jackson's autopsy, but Dr. Klein stated he had it on several occasions and apparently provided medical documentation for a court of law showing this. Also, forensic anesthesiologist Richard J. Levy in 2011 wrote a forensic medical journal stating he believed Michael had it, based on the severity of the damage to his lungs, as well as other telltale signs of SLE found in his autopsy, like the additional autoimmune disease vitiligo and arthritis MJ experienced. Now, let's segue back and talk about the Dangerous Tour. The Dangerous Tour is a special case as there were so many major events that happened in Michael's life and during this era in general, specifically before and throughout the duration of this tour. I wholeheartedly believe that if it wasn't for the people around him at this time, the world could have lost Michael Jackson a lot sooner than 2009. MJ planned for the Bad Tour, of course, to be his final solo tour, but decided on doing this tour to earn money for his newly formed charity, the Heal the World Foundation.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Pepsi-Cola Corporation for sponsoring the Dangerous Tour, which we plan to kick off in June. The only reason I am going on tour is to raise funds for the newly formed Heal the World, an international children's charity that I am spearheading to assist children and the ecology. My goal is to gross $100 million by Christmas 1993. I'm looking forward to this tour because it will allow me to devote time to visiting children all around the world, as well as spread the message of global love in the hopes that others, too, will be moved to do their share to help heal the world. Thank you for coming. I love you very much, and thank you all.
Before the Dangerous Tour started, Michael had surgery on his scalp. As I stated when talking about the Bad Tour, this would have something to do with the ramifications of the Pepsi incident back in 1984, where he suffered burns to his scalp. According to Debbie Rowe, Michael's ex-wife and mother of his 2 eldest children, per her AEG trial testimony, after the initial burn, MJ was basically okay, but he did develop painful thick scars called keloids, which he received medical injections for to soothe, which caused him even more pain as he had a very low pain tolerance. MJ would also use small hair pieces to cover the part of his scalp that had been burned, but found that doing that wasn't the best for his performances. So he had an operation on his scalp to try to get the hair to grow back. Basically, a tissue expander, a saline balloon, was inserted under his skin to stretch his scalp tissue, and he would have it expanded every week about 100 to 200 cc's. On top of this, his schedule was also very busy, with rehearsal for the tour, the Atom Family project, that later became Ghosts in 1997, that he never had time to heal from the surgery. Also, shameless plug, peep MJ Cast episode 161, The Ghost Roundtable, where I, yes me, alongside Adam Green, Paul Black, and Jamin Bull discuss all things ghosts. I'm honestly still gagging that I was invited to be a part of an episode. I love y'all so much. Okay, back to the video. This in turn would cause him chronic migraine headaches from the operation and incredible pain. Regardless of this fact, the Dangerous Tour started in June of 1992, kicking off in Munich, Germany. During the tour, Evan Chandler would accuse Michael of sexually abusing his 13-year-old son, Jordan Chandler.
Time to bring you up to date on the latest news this morning. Controversy is swirling about Michael Jackson this morning as details of a criminal investigation are revealed. Sandra Hughes reports on the police probe and Jackson's response.
Michael Jackson's Dangerous Tour continued without a hitch to sold-out crowds in Bangkok. But back at home, his image was at risk. That's because of reports of allegations by a 13-year-old boy accusing Jackson of fondling him. Through his newly hired criminal lawyer, Jackson denied the accusation.
There was no wrongdoing on my part.
The reports say the boy, the son of a Beverly Hills dentist, told his therapist about the alleged incident.
And once the news broke around the world, it deeply affected Michael. Although he was very good at presenting himself to the general public and performing every night, it was a source of unrelenting anxiety. This is when the stress truly started to take its toll on MJ, and the amount of prescription medications he would receive began to increase. Frank Cassio states, Michael was in extreme pain every night. During every show, he lost a lot of water and was at risk for dehydration, and he required a doctor, sometimes 2 of them, to help him recover. They visited throughout the day to give him nutrients and rehydrate him by IV. He drank Ensure, a protein and vitamin supplement drink, to replenish himself. But then at night, a doctor always came in right before he went to sleep to give him what he called his medicine. I was a kid. All I knew was that the doctor gave him this medicine to help him fall asleep. Only later would I learn that it was Demerol. Demerol is an opioid medication similar to morphine and used to treat moderate to severe pain. It's commonly used before and after surgeries and is highly addictive. Because of its addictive nature, it should never be used to treat long-term or ongoing pain. But with the amount of pain MJ was in, he leaned on it heavily. Now, during the AEG trial, Debbie Rowe did allude to the fact that Number 1, a plan was in place to reduce MJ's use of the drug before he left for the third leg of the Dangerous tour. The timeline could be off because she had a hard time remembering specifically when. Dr. Alan Metzger, MJ's internist/rheumatologist for his lupus, crafted the plan to switch him to non-narcotic medications and slowly wean him off of Demerol. I believe she stated this was happening for about 3 weeks before he left on the third leg of the tour and was derailed by the insurance-provided doctor, Dr. Forecast, when he gave MJ Demerol again. And child, if I didn't have 50 million lemon other things to talk about, I'd spend a little minute talking about him because there's tea. And number 2, that doctors competed to give Michael the quote-unquote better drug to treat his pain. When she said this, she was specifically referring to Dr. Arnold Klein, who I mentioned earlier, and Dr. Stephen Hofflin, MJ's plastic surgeon. And clock this tea, sis! To further prove that the girls were actually fighting, Dr. Klein sued Dr. Hofflin back in 2009 for defamation of character. Apparently, Dr. Hofflin told The Sun, yes, The Sun of all sources, in the minutes following Jackson's death, Dr. Conrad definitely called Klein because Klein taught him how to administer propofol. Murray would have counted on Klein to be the source of propofol and guided him on its use. Klein claimed Hofflin's conduct was willful, fraudulent, malicious, oppressive, and reckless, and was done with the intent to injure and harm Dr. Klein. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this case was dismissed, especially since Dr. Klein died back in 2015. Or 14? I don't know. But oh baby! This tea is deliciosa. As I stated earlier, MJ very much so trusted and respected doctors immensely, believing that they studied and took an oath to do no harm. MJ also couldn't stand to be in pain and feared it. So when a doctor recommended he take something, he listened. She believes these doctors took advantage of him in that way. And this in turn led to him to continue to fall down the rabbit hole of becoming addicted to Demerol. By the time the tour got to its third leg starting in Bangkok is when things would start to crumble and fast. First of all, more doctors came into the mix. Dr. Forecast, who Karen claims was the insurance doctor, and Dr. Finkelstein, who I'm about to discuss. This in turn made it harder to keep track of what Michael was taking and when he was taking it. He also didn't exactly cough up that information either. According to Dr. Metzger, Michael was doctor shopping and took pain medication that the average person wouldn't. For example, I know he had some kind of treatment for his minor procedures in Arnie's, Dr. Klein's, office. I don't know what the treatment was. I had heard it was Demerol, probably from Debbie Rowe. Michael never would tell me what he was doing. And if I didn't prescribe something or I didn't hear it from a health professional, I really wasn't sure what specifically was happening. Sure, we could try to use the justification that MJ was in immense pain, under immense stress with the allegations, and trying to get through a world tour that he never wanted to really do in the first place, but, you know, was doing for charitable purposes. But it was still up to him to be forthcoming about the care he was receiving from all of his physicians. Otherwise, he'd be putting himself at risk, and that's just, well, that's irresponsible. Like, are you dumb or are you stupid, Michael? LOVE though? Second of all, at this point, MJ was pretty much suffering from a full-blown opioid addiction. This was Dr. Stuart Finkelstein's observation upon joining the tour in Bangkok.
I thought he had an opiate problem.
And when you say a problem, do you mean a dependency?
Correct, sir.
Let's run through the factors that led you to believe that Mr. Jackson had a dependency on opiates, okay? We have the patch, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, no problem. We had the 2 ampules of Demerol that were given to you by Karen Fay.
Yes.
Your observation that Mr. Jackson had a high tolerance, is that correct?
Yes.
And then also you testified about scarring on Mr. Jackson's buttocks. Was that a factor that led you to believe that he might have a problem with opiates?
Yes.
And what about the scarring led you to believe that?
Obviously, he had had multiple injections in his buttocks prior to arriving in Bangkok.
Dr. Finkelstein essentially just had to jump in along with Dr. Forecast and give MJ a balance of medications strong enough to overcome his pain, but not strong enough that he couldn't perform. My only gag with Dr. Finkelstein is that he's besties with Paul Gongaware, co-CEO of AEG Live/Concerts West, and you'll find out why that's relevant in our next video. For now, just know we don't like Paul Gongaware. Now, of all the doctors on the tour, I believe Drs. Metzger and Finkelstein genuinely provided great care to Michael Jackson. Dr. Finkelstein stated in particular that he felt like MJ was in genuine pain and would never have administered anything to him if he felt like he wasn't. He was also considered to be Michael's doctor on the This Is It tour, but sadly was not chosen. Who knows how different things would have been if someone like him was chosen over Dr. Conrad Murray. The Dangerous tour would come to an abrupt end in Mexico City. Debbie Rose stated, "We got to Mexico City, I went up to see him, and he was a hot mess. He was depressed, he had taken something. The suite was a mess, he wasn't kept, he wasn't making eye contact, he wasn't speaking, he didn't make sense when he did, and he said he was having problems with his scalp again." And I said, you cannot go to Puerto Rico. You go to Puerto Rico, it's like being in the United States, and you can't go looking and acting like this. You need to straighten up. You need to face whatever it is that's going on, and we'll get through it. You can't just do this. She said the two of them fought for a few days over this until Elizabeth Taylor came to Mexico City and took Michael to rehab.
Here's the thing. We're in Mexico City doing 8 shows in a row, right? Not in a row. He never did back-to-backs. But we're doing 8 shows in Mexico City. And the first third of the show, we do a few songs, and then he goes off and there's a break. And I'm playing the keyboards, and he's getting his makeup done or whatever, right? Getting ready for the next part of the night. And he's back there with Karen Faye, and he's crying. He's sobbing. And he's sobbing because he doesn't know what the audience is thinking, right? He's terrified. And he comes out, and we get on with the night. But basically, the very last show we did in Mexico City, and Liz Taylor was there that night, and it was probably the worst show I've ever seen him do. He still managed to pull it off, but he was sluggish, and he wasn't clear, right? Whatever was going on, it wasn't the normal Michael. That's when Liz Taylor decided to take him to Betty Ford Clinic or wherever she took him.
As you may already know, after my tour ended, I remain out of the country undergoing treatment for a dependency on pain medication. This medication was initially prescribed to see the excruciating pain that I was suffering after recent reconstructive surgery on my scalp. There have been many disgusting statements made recently concerning allegations of improper conduct on my part. These statements about me are totally false. As I have maintained from the very beginning, I am hoping for a speedy end to this horrifying experience to which I have been subjected.
Now, Frank Cassio has somewhat of a different view of these events, stating, "Michael would explain to me that the cancellation of the tour had had nothing to do with the drug addiction. It was because his next tour date was in Puerto Rico on American soil. And if he had entered the United States at the time, there was a very real chance that he would have been arrested on the allegations of child molestation. To avoid his arrest, his team of handlers had to come up with a way to get him out of the rest of the tour. The only way to guarantee that the part of the tour that was canceled would be covered by insurance would be if Michael opted out because of a medical problem. So he told the world he had a problem with prescription medicine." Although I do believe there is some truth behind that statement, based on everything that I just went over, Michael did develop an addiction to opioids, and he did need to seek rehabilitation treatment, whether he wanted to own up to that fact or not. Now, I do believe that he was in genuine pain, but I also believe that there were emotional and environmental stressors that led him to perhaps seeking more pain medication than he would normally need. And I mainly touch of Michael's use of opioids during this time period. I haven't mentioned Diprivan, also known by its generic name Propofol. And I haven't mentioned it here because we have to keep in mind that it is a fairly new drug, first being introduced for therapeutic use in 1986 and approved by the FDA in 1989. It wasn't widely available yet, although Scott Ross, a private investigator who had played key roles in a host of notable cases involving celebrities such as Chris Brown, Danny Masterson, Bill Cosby, and of course Michael Jackson, had mentioned that during the 2011 Conrad Murray trial, upon viewing Dr. Arnold Klein's medical records, that he had started Michael on propofol in 1991.
And unfortunately, Dr. Klein, who I knew very well, Arnie Klein,
You know, his medical records came in, but if you followed that case, Dr. Klein started Michael on propofol in 1991.
This was kind of confirmed by Debbie Rowe's own testimony, stating that the first time she observed Michael receiving propofol was for a procedure in either Dr. Klein or Dr. Hoffman's office, potentially sometime prior to the Dangerous Tour starting in 92 or 93. So at this point in Michael's life, the propofol was only used procedurally in an office setting, predominantly when MJ was receiving under-eye injections, which were very painful for him. However, once we crossed that threshold into the history tour/era, MJ's use of propofol would begin to change. Now, before we get into the history tour, we have to talk about MJ's December 10th, 1995 HBO special that never was, Michael Jackson, One Night Only.
One Night Only. Just for HBO. Sunday, December 10th.
As we unfold that tale, you'll get to know someone pretty important. Anesthesiologist and self-proclaimed rock doc, Dr. Neil Ratner. Based on all the information I've gone over thus far, MJ had quite a few doctors. Is it shade if it's true? So, what makes Rat, as MJ liked to call him, so important? Well, I believe Dr. Ratner, allegedly, was the one who, allegedly, gave Michael Jackson the $1 million idea that he could get a good night's sleep using the anesthetic drug propofol, and that it was totally safe, so long as he was carefully monitored by a physician. Allegedly. Thus, starting the pattern that ultimately led to MJ's death.
Well, let me back up a little bit. You mentioned propofol.
Yeah.
Okay? And I know my name is totally associated with that, and obviously that was something that was associated with his death. So part of the reason that I wrote this book was to clarify, where did this propofol treatment come from? What was the purpose of it? And ultimately, as we all know, it did go wrong. Not in my hands, though.
I want to reiterate that Dr. Ratner has stated that he and Michael Jackson stopped talking in 2002, so he's not responsible for MJ's death in any shape or form. He also was not the one that introduced MJ to propofol initially, since MJ had been receiving it procedurally in office settings since at least 1991. But like I said, I believe he's the one that set the propofol for sleep idea in motion. As we dive deeper into the HBO special, the history tour, and the remaining one-offs MJ did, you'll see that propofol started to become MJ's, mystery mousetool to help him when he was completely at his wit's end with his insomnia. Ratner was also called to testify during the 2013 AEG trial, but for anyone that's read his trial transcript, it was lacking something, sis. And something pretty important. The truth. But don't worry, Rat. I read your book. Rock Doc, was it? So, let's clock some of this tea, sis. Okay, so what exactly is propofol? According to Ratner,
Propofol is a very dose-dependent drug. It's classed as sedative hypnotic, meaning low-dose propofol, it's like a sedative. Medium-dose propofol, it's like a hypnotic. And high-dose propofol, then you can get into the realm of general anesthesia with other medications added.
Okay.
And so that's how the propofol treatment came about.
one of the major advantages of using propofol is its ability to keep a patient in a light sleep-like state from which they could be woken up quickly with few to no side effects. One of Michael's main appeals with the drug was that it knocks you out quickly and you wake up feeling pretty much refreshed. It's commonly referred to as milk of amnesia because of this effect, along with its milky white appearance. MJ would pretty much be out most of the time for about 8 hours, but the 8 hours could feel like 8 minutes. This stuff is very powerful and extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. Although Ratner was an anesthesiologist and stated he took the proper precautions when giving his propofol treatment to MJ,
I fully monitor everything with Michael. I had alarms on everything, so if anything went wrong and I was not quite, paying attention in the room but not paying attention, loud alarms would go off. I mean, there are ways of doing this safely, and I always did it, with the utmost care and safety. And let me say this to you. In the 8 years that I was with Michael, I only gave him the treatment maybe 25 times.
Okay.
And it was at my discretion, totally at my discretion and under my control. And if he didn't like it, that was too bad.
this is not something that should be used unless you are having surgery or an outpatient procedure. It is not something to use in lieu of sleep. Kudos, I guess, to Rat for doing the bare minimum that Dr. Conrad Murray didn't do. I just personally have a hard time trying to justify this, no matter how safe Ratner tried to make it. Now, let's get into the HBO special, shall we?
Back in 94, 95, Michael was slated to do a comeback special for HBO.
Right.
This was to be December of 1995. And it was going to be at the Beacon Theater in New York.
Correct.
And they were going to film it. It was going to be 2 nights.
So the Michael Jackson One Night Only special was going to be filmed on December 7th and 8th of 1995 and then exclusively aired on HBO December 10th. Ratner recalls a phone call that transpired a few weeks before the event.
Thanksgiving Day, 1995. I guess it was maybe 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before the concert.
Okay.
I was at my apartment having Thanksgiving dinner in the city with my parents, and the phone rang. And I talk about this in the book, and it was Michael. And, you know, the conversation started off well enough, but before too long, he was crying, and he was upset, and he couldn't handle it. They were pushing him too hard. He was stressed out. You know, he had all kinds of different problems leading up to that. And he reached out to me and said, help me, you know, be my doctor, work with my other doctors and help me, you know, find a way to help me. And unfortunately, he also wasn't eating well and he was always dehydrated. And so, you know, I was tasked with trying to come up with a solution for these problems so that he could at least do these concerts.
Poor nutrition, dehydration, and lack of sleep were things MJ typically always struggled with during preparations for shows and tour cycles. So, what was the solution that Ratner came up with, you ask?
Say that I was an expert at propofol at that time when Michael reached out to me. I had used it on thousands of cases. I was an anesthesiologist trained in giving drugs to people and making people unconscious and monitoring them. And I realized that this may be my answer. I could use a modified kind of propofol treatment, and during that, tank him up with liquids and nutritional supplements and give him the supposed sleep that he needed. Is it real sleep? No, it's not real sleep, but neither are sleep medications.
All right, let's get this straight. So, Ratner was going to give MJ IV fluids and nutritional supplements. The supposed bonus was that there was also going to be some propofol on deck to give MJ some sleep, but not sleep, since of course propofol-induced sleep is not real sleep. But why isn't it considered real sleep? Well, propofol disrupts the normal sleep cycle and offers no REM sleep, meaning it pretty much gives you the same refreshed feeling of a good sleep, but without the benefits that genuine sleep delivers in repairing brain cells and the body. Once Ratner had this grand idea, he would explain it to MJ, per Ratner's book. When Michael and I spoke next, I explained to him the treatment plan and stressed that its main purpose would be to give him fluids and supplements, with the added benefit of a few hours of sleep. He understood that this was not a substitute for a genuine good night's sleep, but only a temporary solution. We would explore other ways to address his problems once the shows were finished. The first 2 treatments went exactly according to plan. Michael looked a little better, and he said he had more energy. I felt a sense of relief that the measures were working. I knew what I was doing was an off-label use, but seeing him improve gave me confidence that I had come up with a helpful solution. Off-label use? Helpful solution? Man, I hate it here. MJ had struggled with dependency issues, and if anyone should have understood what that was like, it would have been Ratner, since he himself went through rehab and worked hard to get himself clean from narcotics. Even if this was, as he stated, a temporary solution, I know MJ had to think he struck gold when he realized this drug could help him ease his insomnia. And as I stated earlier, Ratner would stop communicating with MJ in 2002. But I mean, if he wasn't going to give MJ the drug, he'd find someone who would, and did. The man was desperate for a good night's sleep, and I don't think Ratner realizes what he did by suggesting or administering this treatment. This drug is what ultimately killed Michael Jackson. Or should I say, the misuse of this drug and a doctor's negligence is what ultimately killed Michael Jackson. Is it shade if it's true? Either way, Ratner's little treatment with MJ for now would come to an abrupt end. On the night of December 6, 1995, he was waiting for MJ to come to his clinic for his 3rd propofol treatment when he got a call from Wayne Nagin, MJ's security guard at the time. While MJ was rehearsing for the HBO special, he collapsed.
It was a circus is what it was. People running back and forth.
There was ambulances, fire trucks, and police officers and everything, and they literally shut down Broadway.
Amsterdam and Broadway. A roadie came out with her credentials and said that Michael Jackson was rehearsing a number, and it just dropped to the ground.
Word of Jackson's hospitalization sent the media into a feeding frenzy and gave an instant 15 minutes of fame to 2 emergency medical technicians.
We pulled up, we found the patient in the stage. He was alert.
We walked up on him, we gave him oxygen, we took his vital signs. When ALS came, they started a line on him, and we also took his vital signs the second time.
How did he appear to you? Was he talkative? Was he white? Was he,
No, he appeared very sluggish. He appeared like he was fatigued, dehydrated.
He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. He had low blood pressure, a rapid heart rate, and was dehydrated. A lot of sources around MJ had said he was near death and unconscious upon arrival at the hospital.
Just heard it's going to take days to possibly a week or two for us to get to a situation where we are feeling safe that he can be on his own, can start taking liquids on his own, and can function on his own. So the career issue is clearly in the future. We don't feel there's any ultimate real jeopardy in the future to his life, but right now we need to stabilize him, and that's going to take more time, more tests, and clearly more time within the intensive care environment.
He would end up spending 6 days there, and the HBO special would subsequently be canceled. Although fans would congregate outside of the hospital where MJ was staying in hopes for his speedy recovery.
Throughout the day, the number of reporters and photographers grew steadily outside the hospital. A handful of fans braved the blustery cold winds to sign a poster wishing the pop star a speedy recovery.
Certain media outlets reported that the whole thing was staged. To quote Damian Shields' article, Inside Michael Jackson's 1995 One Night Only special that never was, Entertainment Weekly took the news of Jackson's collapse with a grain of salt, running a story that asked, "Did Jacko faint on stage? Or stage a faint?" The EW article claimed that an unnamed source had revealed to them that Jackson was displeased that the streets of New York City had not gone into lockdown over his concerts, and that the 2,800-seat Beacon Theater was so small it was incapable of facilitating Jackson's enormous lighting setup. Neither of which were true. Not only was Jackson's collapse and subsequent cancellation of the HBO special seriously detrimental to his health, but it also damaged his future record sales in the United States and tainted the American public's perception of his ability to perform live anymore. The link to the full article will be located in my source notes, of course, darling. I really want to reiterate what Cory Rooney talked about at the beginning of this section. Michael would put so much into his performances and the preparation of these performances that he would neglect himself, and at this point in 1995, it had almost cost him his life. This could bring up a more valid point of, well, if Michael found it difficult to exert himself for long periods of time, night after night, why didn't he do less choreography or tone down his shows? Well, to quote Remember the Time, protecting Michael Jackson in his final days, "Everyone wants me to do a show, but they don't understand that when people come to a Michael Jackson show, they expect me to perform the whole show. I can't just be like the Osmonds. I can't just sit on a stool and sing Kumbaya like these old Vegas crooners. People want me to dance from beginning to end." MJ believed that if people paid to see him, he wanted to give them a show, and one they would never forget. I know that we as fans love MJ regardless and just wanted what was best for him. If that meant him toning down his shows a little bit, then so be it. But if he came out and didn't moonwalk, hit us with that anti-gravity lean, or spin and fall to his knees, the media would be so quick to call that man a has-been.
Hey, Michael, can you still moonwalk? Can you still moonwalk, Michael? Why wouldn't I be able to?
And it would also hurt his pursuits of perfect execution with his performances. So he was essentially damned if he did, and damned if he didn't. The History Tour would go on to be Michael Jackson's final world tour. His life had changed a lot since the Dangerous tour. The settlement of the '93 allegations, his marriage and divorce to Lisa Marie Presley, his, entanglement with Debbie Rowe.
Child. Anyway, so...
And of course, the upcoming birth of his first child in February of 1997. According to Ratner, MJ did have concerns about going on the road again, and was worried that the grueling schedule would put his health in jeopardy. To combat this, he wanted a personal physician to go on tour with him, His primary care physician at the time was his first choice. Ratner was MJ's second choice, but he was worried about leaving his practice and his wife. Ultimately, MJ's management did not want to pay for a full-time physician and thought it was too expensive. They just wanted Ratner to be available if needed. The tour started in September of 1996 in Prague. You bitches can't even spell Prague.
You bitches can't even spell Prague!
The first leg of the history tour went exactly how MJ imagined. Grueling and slowly putting his health in jeopardy. Poor nutrition, dehydration, and of course, lack of sleep. There were also times when MJ was sick or struggled with laryngitis and would push through shows despite these things. Hence the increase of backing tracks and lip-synced vocals. But that's not what this video is about, like I said earlier. And my man's Michael could sing out when he really wanted. Someone roll the clip of Michael singing Earth Song live in Brunei for these lessers. Because tell me what about it? Struggle vocals where? I believe the real trouble would start during the second leg of the tour in the summer of 1997. After the 5-month break, MJ took off for the birth of his son. Having his son added another layer of stress on top of the issues MJ had with touring. As Frank Cassio stated, he didn't believe a baby should be dragged from city to city. So he set Prince up in Paris, a central location in terms of the tour's itinerary, with 2 nannies to care for him day and night. Each night after he finished his concert, Michael flew back to his apartment on the Champs-Élysées by private jet. Whenever he wasn't performing, he was with Prince. It was a tough schedule, but Michael was trying to be both a father and a mother to his son. Now, when I'm talking about the summer of 1997, I'm specifically referring to the 2 dates in Munich, Germany. This is when MJ would begin the use of propofol on tour.
All right. Did Michael tell you he used Diprovan?
I knew at one point that he was using Diprovan when he was on tour in Germany. And so he was using it with an anesthesiologist to go to sleep at night. And I told him he was absolutely insane. I said, you have to understand that this drug you can't repeatedly take.
He had called Dr. Metzger and said he couldn't sleep. Debbie Rowe would then call Dr. Metzger to find out what they could do. This would end up with them setting up a makeshift medical suite in MJ's hotel room in Germany. Debbie Rowe states, there were 2 anesthesiologists. There was enough equipment where it looked like a surgical suite. It wasn't, but it looked like it. I thought the second doctor was actually just a nurse or something. And they said no, this is how they worked. I don't know if they meant this was how they worked medically or how they worked from their office, but anything over 4 hours would be 2 physicians so they wouldn't get tired because it was constant monitoring. Of course, MJ was told the risks, but he was more worried about not sleeping and not being able to perform.
It was 4:30 in the morning, and he was wide awake, and then he complained. I got to sleep, Dr. Conrad. I have these rehearsals to perform. I must be ready for the show in England. Tomorrow I will have to cancel my performance. I have to cancel my trip because, you know, I cannot function if I don't get the sleep.
This again was preached to him as a temporary solution and not something that could be done all the time. Debbie Rowe stated that this was not going to happen again, since the use of propofol in this way was not appropriate and not labeled use. So he didn't do it anymore. When Debbie was around, enter Dr. Ratner on the 3rd leg of the tour. In his book, he claims Wayne, MJ's security guard at the time, begged him to come on the final leg of the tour in South Africa. Ratner, you're coming with us to Africa, he said. I didn't know what he was talking about. I had my own problems and had lost track of their schedule. You should have been on the whole history tour. No more bullshit. You're coming with us on this last leg. Why now, Wayne? What happened? He responded vaguely. Ratner, you're coming. I don't want to hear it. We'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Ratner was pretty much given the rundown of what was going on and decided on his plan of action. to continue the use of the propofol plan he had started with Michael in New York City during the one-night-only preparations. Michael's bad habits hadn't changed much. He was eating poorly, not drinking enough fluids, and chronically tired from the lack of sleep. I had given Michael's problems a lot of thought. I felt the treatment I had started in New York could be successful if controlled and used sparingly. Of course, he would be fully monitored, and I would be right there at all times. In addition, I would make sure I had oxygen, a defibrillator, and a crash cart. This leg of the tour was only 3 weeks, and the concerts were not on consecutive days. That would give me the ability to separate the treatments and make them available only either the night before or the night after a show, depending on Michael's medical concern. Off-label use of medications for unapproved indications is common and perfectly legal. Doctors treat patients with off-label medication all of the time. Still, I was well aware using propofol for this purpose was unorthodox and would be controversial. I was not advocating propofol as a sleep medication for anyone else but Michael, and even then, only as part of a treatment while he was touring. This was a one-of-a-kind treatment for a very difficult patient in a unique situation, and I believe it was the best possible solution under the circumstances. I don't know how many times in how many different languages I can say this, and I know y'all are sick of me saying it, but to me personally, it doesn't matter which way you slice this. It is unorthodox, it is an off-label use, and yes, off-label use of certain medications is legal, but this is a highly powerful and dangerous anesthetic drug we're talking about here, not some run-of-the-mill over-the-counter drug, and even then, you gotta watch it with some of those. The risk outweighs the benefit here. Wait, is anyone getting deja vu?
There was not an appropriate medical indication. The problem that Mr. Jackson was having was that he couldn't sleep, and it's not appropriate to give propofol in that situation. The risk outweighs the benefit.
Of course, I appreciate that Ratner cared to take the right precautions, had the right medical equipment on standby, and was certified to use these types of medications as an anesthesiologist. But Michael Jackson's, this ain't it! Especially because this wasn't just a tour thing. He was trying to make this a casual Tuesday type of deal. Not only was Michael's moonwalk iconic, but his insomnia was chronic, baby. And I don't continuously bring this up to make it seem like Michael was this horrible person and some junkie, because I know he was only doing all of this because he was exhausted and just wanted some kind of relief. I'd like to think that if there was any other option, he would have tried it. But to sit here and act like this is an okay and completely justifiable solution is absolute insanity. It's a band-aid fix, and no one ever helped him actually fix his sleep, it seems, on a long-term basis after these tours ended. Or, a more valid question, was he not willing to accept treatment to fix his sleeping problems outside of the use of propofol or various sleeping medications like Ativan? But y'all don't want to have that conversation. The final show of the History Tour was in Durban, South Africa, and Ratner believed he had done what he set out to do. No shows were canceled, and MJ's health was good. Fast forward a couple years to 1999, where MJ would decide to do 2 one-off shows for charity. One in Seoul, Korea on June 25th, 1999, exactly 10 years before his death, and another in Munich, Germany on June 27th. This would be the Michael Jackson and Friends Concerts.
We will be holding a concert, a benefit concert in Seoul, Korea on June 25th for the needy children in North Korea and in Kosovo, Africa, and everywhere else in the world. We all believe using all the recognition and success endowed upon us by our fellow human beings for the good of others less fortunate is the best way to be faithful stewards to our talent. And because I know well the warmth and caring hearts of my friends in Korea, I know this concert will be a success. I will see you all in June. I love you very much, and thank you.
Artists such as Boyz II Men, Slash, and Mariah Carey joined MJ for these concerts. The first show in Korea seemed okay. Apparently there were a few technical glitches that Michael was upset about, but that was just the perfectionist in him, I imagine. However, the second show in Munich did not go as planned. MJ was the last to perform on stage and was going through his set list. He had 2 songs left, Earth Song and You Are Not Alone. As he performed Earth Song, he stepped onto a big bridge that spanned across the front of the stage. It raised up, lifting him about 50 feet in the air, and was supposed to descend gradually, but instead, it plummeted. "I thought he was dead," Karen Faye recalls. "I was devastated. Then I saw an arm go on stage, then another arm, and then his leg, and he got up and he finished that song." After finishing the song, MJ briefly went backstage. He was in immense pain but pushed through, stating that his father told him no matter what, the show must go on. He would perform his final song, "You Are Not Alone," and collapse off stage. MJ, Dr. Ratner, Frank Cassio, and their driver, who spoke broken English, ended up driving MJ to a hospital since there were no ambulances available. It took them far longer than anticipated, but once they arrived, MJ was assessed. Nothing was broken, and he had no internal injuries, but he had a very serious back sprain. Ratner claims the doctors told MJ he was well enough to leave the hospital the same night, but opted to stay because he knew he would get pain meds. However, in this instance, perhaps the pain medication was justified. Anyway, here's where things get interesting. Frank Cassio never once mentions Dr. Ratner by name in his book. Not once. But Ratner name drops him, and he was obviously by MJ's side because the events match up. I also find it funny how although they were both present for this event, even if it could have been at different times, they don't mention each other. Now, according to Frank, when MJ and him made it back to the hotel, Michael and I were only alone in his suite for only a few minutes before a doctor who traveled with Michael from New York came into the room with 2 other people. They started to set up some medical equipment next to Michael's bed. "Who are these people?" I asked the doctor. "They're doctors," he responded. "They're going to help Michael fall asleep." Only later would I fully understand what I had witnessed that night. It was the first time I saw Michael about to receive the drug, propofol. Now, here's how Ratner tells it. "When we got back to Michael's suite, I was shocked and upset to find 2 German anesthesiologists waiting for us. I didn't know them personally, but I knew the 2 had been on the history tour prior to my arrival. Michael had been pestering me to contact them. He liked the way they had administered propofol and wanted me to learn their technique. I couldn't imagine what they did differently, unless they were combining propofol with other medications like Valium or narcotics, something I refused to do. Michael had obviously contacted them. He saw by my angry expression that I was fuming, and he pulled me aside. 'No, Rat, you don't understand. You worked hard the last few days, and I wanted to give you the day off.' The anesthesiologists had all their equipment with them, and I could see that their plan was to treat him as soon as he arrived from the hospital. Michael wanted to be out for the day." And this is what I'm talking about when I say that the propofol wasn't just a tour thing for MJ. Okay. It was becoming a casual Tuesday type of deal for him because at this point, he had no more shows planned. I mean, his next big major event wasn't until Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary celebration, a series of 2 shows that took place at the Madison Square Garden in New York City on September 7th and 10th of 2001. The purpose of these shows was to commemorate 30 years of Michael Jackson as a solo entertainer. The first half of the show would be in honor of Michael, where popular artists, as well as his favorite artists, would perform some of his songs. The second half, he would perform with his brothers and then do a solo set. This marks the last time all of the Jacksons would perform together. There would later be a televised version of these concerts aired on CBS in November of 2001. Now, there's actually a lot of piping hot tea that surrounds these 2 concerts, from the ticket prices being expensive, alleged rifts within the Jackson family, and people speculating that this whole fiasco would never happen. According to David Guest, MJ's longtime friend and producer of the 30th anniversary special, per his book Simply the Guest, the biggest worry was Michael himself. What I had noticed back at the beginning of the 90s was even more prevalent now. The difference between the old Michael Jackson and the new one was just that he was just not as focused as before. Michael was not as interested as he used to be. Back in the 80s, he was the ultimate detail man. He looked at every aspect of his career, forgetting nothing. He would always deliver the greatest performances, especially when he needed to. Not anymore. Around this time, Frank Cassio and members of the Jackson family feared that MJ had fallen back into using prescription opioids, specifically Demerol. I assume his injury during the MJ and Friends shows was the catalyst to this. Apparently, a few days before the September 7th show, there was a mini intervention staged to try to talk with him about it. But that did nothing but anger and annoy him. Frank recalls the meeting. A couple of days before the show, they, Tito, Randy, Jana, and Frank, met with Michael to talk about the matter. But of course, Michael told them that there was no cause for concern. He had barely acknowledged to himself that he had a problem. They wanted to be there for him, and they tried, but as I had feared, he wouldn't let his family into his life to help, not even for a moment. Michael avoided confrontations. After the meeting, all he said about it was, "My family talked to me about my medicine." They were out of line. I could tell from the way he dismissed the conversation that he was no more convinced by them than he had been by me. I'm sure his family persisted. Janet and I spoke several times after the special, but Michael simply pushed them away. Fast forward to September 6th, MJ attended the 2001 VMAs, where he made a surprise appearance at the end of NSYNC's performance. Is that Joey Fatone? Now, why did he do that? But clog this tea, sis! According to David Guest, 2 days before the show, NSYNC, then one of the biggest bands in the world, led by Justin Timberlake, informed us they were about to pull out. The only way they would stay on the bill was if Michael would perform with them on the MTV Video Music Awards. We were due to have our main rehearsal that very day. Without my knowledge, he meekly agreed to NSYNC's demand, not even telling me. Michael went on to the MTV Awards show, then arrived late for the run-through of the most important 2 shows of his life. He allowed only 2 hours to rehearse a complex sequence of songs and dances that included not just his brothers, but other acts as well.
I was on the phone to a guy called Rudy Provencio, who was part of Michael's camp and entourage around the Invincible Era. He was sent by Sony to try to get Michael over the finish line on the album. He told me a story about being backstage at the VMAs with Michael when he was about to go on that night. And he just said he was sort of observing Michael as he was standing backstage, preparing to go on stage, and he just looked so depressed. And somebody came over and said to him, "Mr. Jackson, they're ready for you." And he just let out this long sigh, like, oh, okay.
Wow.
After the performance, Dr. Ratner had administered his propofol treatment to Michael. According to Ratner, the treatment I gave him went well, and Michael slept through the night. When I left in the morning, we exchanged a few words. Although it was almost 10 a.m. and he needed to be dressed and ready in an hour or so, he said he was still sleepy and didn't want to get up right then. I knew he was nervous about the show, but Michael was a true professional. I was sure he would work it out and be great. About 4 p.m., I got a frantic call from Frank. And this is when things started to take a turn. Let's go over the recollections of Karen Faye, Frank Cassio, David Guest, and Dr. Ratner to piece this story together. Per Frank Cassio's book, I'd barely shut my eyes when I got a call from Henry, the head of security at the time. "Karen needs to get in to see Michael," he said. "It's time for her to do his makeup. But he's not answering the door or his phone." This wasn't anything new, I said. "Don't worry, I have the keys." I promptly let myself into Michael's suite, but quickly discovered that the door to his bedroom was also closed and locked. It was a flimsy lock, so I broke it, sliding open the doors. There was Michael, lying in bed, sleeping. I went to wake him up. "Michael, do you know what time it is? You should have been in makeup an hour ago. You have to get ready. What happened?" He rolled over and moaned. So Karen Faye stated in her AEG trial testimony that she went to get MJ ready about 2 hours before he was due at Madison Square Garden, and there was a doctor in his room. She did not specify who. The doctor was surprised to see her and said, "You can't come in here now. I've given Michael something and he's going to be asleep for 5 to 6 hours." I said, "This can't happen." I think it was Frank Cassio who helped me get him up. I did his makeup and hair while he was almost out. I was walking him around. I gave him Gatorade and a bagel, trying to get whatever they put in his system out. His fans and everyone were all there waiting. It was a desperate situation. He was still sleepy, but he did get there, and he did perform. And I think that's about all you can say about that September 7th performance. Oof. Did it get shady in here? Now, let's pick it back up from when Ratner received the frantic phone call from Frank. Rat, I don't know what to do. I can't wake him up. What? He must have called the house doctor to get a shot of Demerol. Now he won't get up. Oh shit, is he breathing? My first thought was a possible overdose. That's not the problem. He has to start with makeup and get ready for the show. Frank was extremely agitated. Throw him in the shower, get him some coffee, and force him up, Frank. Eventually, Frank did get Michael up and proceeded to give him what I call a verbal ass whooping. Shaking him awake, I asked, "The doctor was here, wasn't he?" Already knowing the answer. In a very slow voice, he said, "Yeah, Frank, I was in so much pain. I couldn't do it. I was in so much pain. You did this to try to get out of the show," I fumed. "It was an excuse." Michael didn't say anything, but I saw from the look on his face that he knew I was right and that he had let me down. "My back was killing me and I had to do the show," he said. "I'm fine." While all this was going on, David Guest was somewhere screaming, crying, and violently throwing up.
He walks up the red carpet with Liz Taylor, who of course is pretty ancient by then.
Not Elizabeth Taylor catching strays.
And he is sort of clinging to Liz Taylor for support, whereas it should be the other way around. And he walked up the red carpet with his flies undone. With white showing through his flies. He was interviewed briefly by a few cameras on the red carpet and he was slurring.
What makes it so great? What makes it such a great night for you? It's a reunion, and I'm honored that the world appreciates my art. I'm very honored.
You know, you can see what a bad state he's in when he arrives on that first night.
I went backstage and started making frantic calls. I was assured he was on his way and would be there any minute. The clock kept ticking. It was exactly 9 p.m. when Michael turned up with Elizabeth Taylor at his side. I took one look at him and my heart sank. He was subdued and almost disinterested. It was as if he wasn't there. Back in our last section, I think I talked about how MJ would try to get out of doing certain things, and well, this is an example of one of those instances.
Why you booing me? I'm right.
Ratner even further confirms MJ's tendency to do this with the drug Demerol specifically. I knew Michael was uptight about these shows, and I understood why. Whoever the group, the pinnacle of the US concert scene was playing at Madison Square Garden. Besides that, he had not played in front of a US audience since the Bad Tour in 1989. As nervous as he was, I didn't think he would try to sabotage himself. He had done it before, but not since I had been working with him. Demerol was his go-to drug when his feelings of fear and discomfort overcame him. Zone out, escape, cancel the show, and tell the world you were sick. I was upset and discouraged that Michael was slipping back into that bad place. Even though Michael made it to the concert, it started over an hour late, and Michael wasn't himself. Every time I looked at Michael, I just felt worse. He seemed totally out of it. He just sat there stony-faced and watched the show, moving his hands to say thank you to people as they sang to him. Michael had pulled himself through the performance, which wasn't bad by any standards, but it wasn't his greatest. It just didn't have his usual electrifying quality. Something was wrong with him, and he knew I knew. The second show on September 10th went a lot smoother, and MJ was on time. Probably because he received yet another verbal ass whooping, and this time from David. If you are not here at 4 o'clock on Monday for the second show, you will lose $5,000 per minute from your paycheck. I am serious. I signed the checks. 1 minute over, you lose $5,000. If you are an hour late again, you will owe me $300,000.
See, as you can see, the more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
After hearing of these events from Frank, Ratner put his foot down and decided to stop administering his treatments to Michael. He states initially he wanted to instill healthier habits for MJ to follow during tour cycles and for his performances, but it seemed like he leaned on the propofol as a crutch, and he was never particularly good at getting MJ to give up the Demerol since he was getting it from other doctors. The last time Ratner would administer propofol to MJ would be in Washington, D.C., before MJ's United We Stand What More Can I Give 2001 benefit concert held in tribute to the victims of the September 11th attacks. But something tells me this wouldn't be the last time MJ would try to obtain propofol, and it certainly wouldn't be the last of his Demerol use.
He wanted to make the Invincible album work to the point where that was it. You know, he's done with the tour. He was going to do this Invincible album. He wanted to continue to put out albums. He said, I'll put out an album I'll do albums until I can't do it anymore. But I just can't tour.
With everything we know now, I think we can deduce that in some ways, the This Is It tour was doomed from the start. Michael Jackson would fall into the same patterns on every tour, one-off show, performance, and even during the creation of his albums. Poor nutrition, dehydration, and insomnia. He was someone that would get so enmeshed in what he was doing at times, nothing else mattered. Aside from those issues, he also dealt with chronic pain in his back, scalp when receiving treatments, and suffered from a condition called dancer's feet, which is just the name associated with the common foot ailments a dancer suffers, like calluses, bunions, corns, and raw skin caused by friction.
Michael Jackson had other health issues that never were discussed. Like, he had what's called dancer's feet. Okay? Dancer's feet is when your feet, over the years of dancing, a dancer wraps their feet to dance. Like, they wrap them in tape and things like that.
Absolutely.
But, of course, because you don't get enough oxygen and things, your skin dries up. Your skin starts to crack and split, like almost like paper cuts, okay? And Michael suffered bad with that. So what would happen is sometimes it'd be so bad he have to wrap his feet in a cast. And that's why sometimes you would see him with a cast on, okay? The pain for that was excruciating. And, was he on the painkillers for that? Yeah, I'm sure he was. I never physically seen him take a pill or a painkiller, but I definitely have spoken to him about it.
These things in turn would cause him to lean on medication for the sake of being able to complete his obligations, or even get out of them altogether. Opioids like Demerol or morphine for his pain, various sedatives such as lorazepam, and sleeping pills like Ativan to help him with his insomnia. But of course, they never really worked. So he would lean on the help of anesthesiologists to go on tour with him at times to administer the dangerous anesthetic propofol. Throughout Michael's life, he struggled with addiction and dependency to various prescription pain medications as well as propofol. Now, as I've reiterated several times, I don't point out these things to make Michael seem like he was some junkie or constantly looking for a high. That wasn't the purpose of this section. The purpose was to point out that when MJ said he went through hell touring, he truly meant that with his whole entire chest.
Action, Michael.
I love to tour.
All right, I'm not going to lie. That is a very funny video. It's fun to hear Michael talking about touring. My name is Brad Sundberg, in the studio with MJ. I worked with Michael for nearly 20 years, starting on album projects, Captain EO. Then I did tour prep. And I did a lot of work up at Neverland. Now, as to whether or not Michael really hated touring, I've talked to Brad Buxer about this several times, and I actually called him today. Brad Buxer was Michael's musical director. I'm Brad Sundberg. I was Michael's technical director. And I asked Buxer, I said, okay, did Michael really hate touring that much? And he said, Sundberg, he was basically over it. Buxer did, close to 275 shows with Michael, something like that. And he said it was just city after city, hotel after hotel. And it's not that glamorous. You're taking freight elevators and going up with cleaning carts and all kinds of stuff.
I wholeheartedly believe that the pain MJ suffered was very real, and he was definitely desperate for a good night's sleep. Are there times I personally think he abused these medications though? Absolutely, and in some instances at no fault of his own. But Michael Jackson suffered the ultimate consequence for his actions. However, most of these doctors that fought to give MJ the better drug, the ones that gave MJ off-label use propofol to begin with, the ones he blindly trusted to do no harm, they're still here. And more importantly, so are those people who pressured a 50-year-old man who hadn't toured in 12 years to do 50 shows, while watching him slowly decline in the process. Let's all take a moment to refill our teacups, clean up our surroundings in case of accidental spilling, and recoup after the intensity of our last section. Welcome to our first intermission. An intermission is a recess between parts of a performance or production, such as for a theatrical play, opera, concert, or film screening. As part 1 of this series comes to a close, there's just one last thing we need to discuss before showtime kicks off in part 2, and that's Michael Jackson's management. In the final months of MJ's life, his ever-changing management became a source of confusion and headache. Randy Phillips once said, with Michael Jackson and his advisors, you needed a scorecard. From the dismissal of Dr. Tohme Tohme, the convenient reappearance of Frank Dileo, a manager MJ fired in the 1980s, and Leonard Rowe, the man who only had a role in Michael's life as a financial overseer, I only have one question. Will Michael Jackson's real manager please stand up?
Michael was deathly afraid of him. That's an excellent word, deathly afraid.
In Section 2, we briefly discussed a man by the name of Dr. Tohme Tohme, who alongside investment firm Colony Capital helped save Neverland from foreclosure back in 2008. Subsequently, he would be given the title as Michael Jackson's official manager and spokesperson that same year. But who is this man? And more importantly, was he trying to control Michael Jackson? Dr. Tohme Tohme, according to his alleged official website, describes himself as a consultant, manager, financier, and entrepreneur. He's supposedly an orthopedic surgeon turned businessman, though there's been a lot of speculation about him actually being a medical doctor.
He goes by Dr. Tohme, but he isn't licensed to practice medicine in any of the states he's lived in.
And as far as his business practices,
court papers reveal Tohme's been accused of everything from fraud to making threats. NBC News has obtained hundreds of pages of court documents from the 1990s detailing allegations of fraudulent real estate loans against Tohme. He resolved the suits before they went to trial without ever admitting any liability.
In the early days when I met with Michael, I was taking care of everything. I was taking care of his personal affair, his business, his day-to-day life. When I came to Michael's life, I was the only one there.
Tohme pretty much takes responsibility for the rehabilitation of Michael Jackson, according to an article published by Daily Mail in July of 2009. When I first met him in Las Vegas, he was out of touch. Michael was secluded and retreating from everybody. It was just him and his kids. He used to use the wheelchair. I said, let's get rid of this. You have to realize that you had to baby Michael Jackson. I wanted people to see him as a healthy human being. But he was working. We put a stage in his house in Las Vegas because before, he was practicing in the local hotels. He was writing music, working with choreographers, and after we started talking to AEG for the London gigs, I decided Vegas was not the right place for Michael to stay at the time, especially for the children. It is very hot in the summer. LA is where all the action is. I convinced him to move to LA, and he took residence at the Bel Air Hotel for 3 months. Then I rented the house for him. Then we signed the deal with AEG, and we went to London. Now, Michael Jackson during this time in mid to late 2008 was in deep financial strain, still battered, bruised, and bloody from everything he went through during the 2005 trial, and had seemingly lost all the confidence he once had. To have found someone like Tohme that seemingly had good intentions for him was probably a godsend, so much so that MJ gave him complete control. In 2012, Tohme sued John Branca and John McClane, the current co-executors of the Michael Jackson estate. And this went on for years, by the way. According to the suit, there were 3 different agreements between MJ and Tohme in May, July, and August of 2008. One of these agreements even gave him power of attorney, which in layman's terms means, well,
your butt is mine.
It's been said that Michael did not have a lawyer present when signing these agreements, and if that's true, he really had no idea what he got himself into. To quote Tohme's suit, Tohme was in charge of handling Jackson's financial affairs. He handled the payment of bills, expenses, outstanding loans, and other debt obligations, including tax obligations. Tohme was also responsible for overseeing the status of Jackson's business ventures with Sony. Tohme was also in charge of hiring, firing, and overseeing the business representatives and personal staff that provided needed services to Jackson, inclusive of attorneys, accountants, and security personnel. Tohme also discharged the pre-existing security team and brought in an entirely new staff to handle the security for Jackson. Tohme was Jackson's official spokesperson in dealings with the media. Tohme's duties also included regularly taking care of the needs of Jackson and his family with respect to a wide variety of personal matters. Per the agreement between Michael and Tohme, he would be entitled to the following: a finder's fee for 10% of the sale of Neverland, 10% of gross proceeds proceeds if MJ ever sold any interest in Neverland, 10% of any profit MJ earned through Colony Capital, a service fee of $35,000 per month, all expenses paid, and 15% compensation for any work done by MJ, which is why he went after the MJ estate, since he claimed he was so pivotal in reviving MJ's career and the This Is It deal. This also included a power of attorney, which meant that he could do what he pleased with regard to Michael's work or property.
Your bud is mine.
He'd also be receiving $100,000 a month from AEG. As I stated, the final agreement between the two of them would be orchestrated in August of 2008. But by September 2008, he was beginning to regret his decision about hiring Dr. Tohme, as he felt there was a divide between him and his representatives. In an article from CBS, published in July 2009, Tohme states, "I built a fence around Michael to keep people out," he said, acknowledging that he cut costs by firing many members of the Jackson staff, including security guards, and he twice fired the children's nanny, Grace Wawamba, on Jackson's orders. "I was trying to do what we could to maximize his profits and minimize spending. I wanted to find a way to reel in all the loans he had. We had an agreement," Tohme continued. "I would never interfere with his creative decisions, and he wouldn't interfere with my business decisions." Apparently, Michael began telling people that he feared Tohme was trying to isolate him so that he could control him. It seemed to me that just as Gordon once did to me, Tohme was separating Michael from others. Michael didn't have access to any outside perspective or support from those who might have advised him that his new business advisor didn't seem to have his best interest at heart. Once Tohme shut out the rest of the world, he would be able to steer Michael toward business ventures that were profitable for Tohme and his friends.
Alonco feels Michael was pushed into the London concert series by businessmen trying to exploit Jackson's well-publicized money troubles.
Dr. Tohme was charged with one thing, and that's to bring money into Colony Capital, to recover that debt that they had on Neverland. And Dr. Tohme used AEG as one of the tools to do that. And that was, they had at one point told me it was a $500 million 3-year project. That's a tremendous amount of money at stake. And I think money corrupts, and I think you see the end result of greed.
Michael went on to further explain his fear of Tohme in a taped interview with his spiritual advisor, June Gatlin.
This guy, he just has ways about him that looks like see what he's done. He's built this divide between me and my representatives, and I don't talk to my lawyer, my accountants. I talk to him, and he talks to them. That's not good. I know it's not good. I don't like it. And I want to get somebody in there with him that I know and trust. I don't know what's in my accounts. I don't know. Oh, that's not good, Michael. I know that's not good.
What did Michael tell you that Tohme was doing?
He said he's trying to say who I can see and where I can see them, and he said I don't like it.
He had taken over Michael's complete life. He had taken over.
How much control did Tohme Tohme have over Michael Jackson's finances?
He had pretty much complete control.
In what way?
He had checking accounts. He was having money put into the accounts. He was signing checks.
He was signing checks for Michael Jackson?
Yeah.
And Michael allowed that?
He gave him the power to do it.
When Michael talked to you about Tohme Tohme, what did he say?
June, I don't like him. I don't trust him. He's mean. He's trying to keep me and separate me from everything and everybody I love.
We cannot allow somebody to just be in total control of your life. I totally agree with that. That's why I'm calling you.
Before we continue, let's take a brief segue to talk about the Julian's auction debacle in April of 2009. It's relevant, I promise. As we've covered, Neverland was facing foreclosure in 2008. The property was completely abandoned, and MJ hadn't even been there since probably 2005. With the impending foreclosure, Tohme was trying to bring in some revenue to eliminate MJ's debt. That's when the Julian's auction comes in. According to an article from Newsweek Tribute magazine published in 2014, Michael hadn't been there for 3 years, and he never wanted to return, explains Darren Julian, founder of Julian's Auctions. We were trusted with the responsibility to go in and remove everything everything and sell it on Michael's behalf. It took us 30 men, 90 days, and 10 semi-trailers packed from floor to ceiling. It was unbelievable. We were loading statues, furniture, paintings, hundreds of arcade games, everything. Everything also included limousines, life-size wax butlers and maids, a carriage, Michael's tour bus, 20 years worth of custom clothing, and even the massive ornate gates that welcome visitors to Neverland Ranch.
My name is Darren Julian. I'm President and CEO of Julian's Auctions, and behind me is the mega exhibition of Michael Jackson and Neverland.
What we wanted to do from the beginning is really give Michael Jackson an exhibition that he would be proud of.
The exhibition was open to the public until the day before the auction, which is April 21st, and the auction takes place April 22nd through the 25th.
This has been a monumental task from the day we were hired. We started working on the project on August 8th, right through to the auction, which takes place April 22nd to the 25th. So it's a 9 months production. It's been a phenomenal project.
Behind me here are the gates for Neverland. Obviously, they're on a truck, but tonight they're going to be mounted. And so what will happen is that they'll be placed here on the entryway of the exhibition. And what will happen is people coming into the exhibition will be walking through the gates of Neverland to enter.
Now here's the tea. See, Michael was totally on board with the auction, but supposedly he was under the impression only his furniture and storage would be sold, and not everything in the house, including his gates. According to Jermaine, Tohme Tohme's days were numbered from when he orchestrated an auction of Neverland's possessions in the hope of raising more money to cancel more debt. Michael had approved it, but understood that only furniture and storage would be sold. The next thing he knew was that a wholesale dismantling of Neverland was taking place. He was horrified and furious to learn that personal possessions of sentimental value, even his Yadro collection, were due to go under the hammer at Julian's auction house. He had to take legal action to halt the sale. This legal action started to take place around the March 5th press conference, where MJ was to announce his comeback concert residency, This Is It. The day we opened an exhibit in Ireland at the Museum of Style Icons to promote the sale, Michael had a press conference in London to announce the This Is It concerts. That's the same day we got the call from the lawyers. It was like, oh God.
The final straw came just months before Michael's death as he announced his London concerts. A happy moment with drama backstage. Michael's personal possessions were up for auction, and Tohme got into a dispute with the auctioneers. In court papers obtained by NBC News, the auctioneer said Tohme's people actually threatened their lives, saying there will be bloodshed. Tohme denies ever telling anyone to say that, but it was enough for Michael Jackson to sever ties with the man who ran his life.
Didn't he also say that Tohme Tohme said that he was going to screw Michael Jackson in a very vivid description?
And the entire Jackson clan. Just about a month before Michael died, Tohme was let go by Jackson and was very bitter about that. Laka was at a meeting when Tohme completely lost it and said he was going to bring death and destruction, I don't know if it was literally, on to the Jackson family.
Michael had been granted an advance prior to the concerts, and with the windfall, he had enough money to save Neverland, and decided that maybe he didn't want to sell the things he'd held most dear. His management team took care of the rest, enlisting a team of lawyers who went to great lengths to shut down the auction. In a shocking turn of events, court documents accused Julian's Auctions of stealing all of Jackson's property, all 10 truckfuls of it. We signed in with the security guards every morning and again when we left. They'd hired us to do the auction, and now they're calling us thieves? It was ludicrous. Julian says he has a contract signed by Tohme allowing him to take anything he could sell, even fixtures. He encouraged it and stated MJ had taken everything he wanted from the property already. The auction went from everything must go to everything must go back in the blink of an eye. All of it. 113 arcade games, more than 70 lawn statues, 46 custom jackets, several suits of armor, espresso machines, the Neverland Ranch fire truck, an airbrushed golf cart, even Edward Scissorhands' scissor hands. One-of-a-kind treasures, once available for sale, were quickly boxed up and given back to Michael Jackson. Now, let's segue back to the part where Dr. Tohme Tohme gets fired.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The Julian's auction was Michael's last straw with Tohme, and he was dismissed by Michael in March of 2009. In April, he would finalize the termination by revoking Tohme's power of attorney. In May, for the third time, he would dismiss Tohme again in the form of a letter. This would mark the entrance of Frank Dileo.
He said, I don't speak to Tohme. I don't want to deal with Tohme. What do we do from here? I have to write him a letter.
So you let everybody know Tohme Tohme and Michael Jackson aren't together anymore.
Right.
This is the letter written on May 5th, 2009, signed by Michael Jackson himself. It says, Dr. Tohme R. Tohme is no longer authorized to represent me. But friends say Tohme didn't take the hint. He kept trying to do business on Michael's behalf. The day of Michael's death, he was at the hospital.
To whom it may concern, at my direction and effective immediately, Dr. Tohme R. Tohme is no longer authorized to represent me, nor conduct any personal or professional business on my behalf, included but not limited to Michael J. Jackson, MJJ Productions, MJJP, MJJ Kingdom, and any and all other LLPs or LLCs currently in operation. Thank you for your cooperation. Sincerely, Michael J. Jackson. But why wouldn't Tohme just, beat it?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Well, we could assume that it was because of his allegiance to AEG. For one thing, Tohme was still named in Michael Jackson's AEG contract as his manager, since it was never updated to reflect the change to Frank Dileo. If we go back to what LaToya said in her book about how, once Tohme shut out the rest of the world, he would be able to steer Michael towards business ventures that were profitable for Tohme and friends, those friends were AEG.
Dr. Tohme's was charged with one thing, and that's to bring money into Colony Capital to recover that debt that they had on Neverland. And Dr. Tohme used AEG as one of the tools to do that. And that was, they had at one point told me it was a $500 million 3-year project. That's a tremendous amount of money at stake. And I think money corrupts, and I think you see the end result of greed.
To quote Randall Sullivan's book, Untouchable, The Strange Life and Tragic Death of Michael Jackson, and I know some of y'all just went like this, but I'm gonna need you to do this and let me cook, because this quote is very telling. Tohme would say later that whatever doubts he harbored about his own status were soothed by that visit to the Staples Center. Randy Phillips introduced him to everyone as Dr. Tohme, Michael's manager, and placed a bracelet around his wrist that would allow Tohme access to the Staples Center rehearsals anytime he wanted to show up. At one point, Michael waved to Frank Dileo and said, "Come here and give your boss a hug." Dileo responded by walking away, and Tohme asked Randy Phillips, "What's that guy doing here?" "They kept Dileo around," Phillips answered, according to Tohme, because he makes Michael laugh. If we accept this quote as fact, it shows that not only did AEG completely ignore Michael's wishes to axe Tohme, they seem to almost mock his decision and attempts to have more control over his life.
Was Michael trying to change his life around at the end?
He wasn't trying. Michael was not trying to change his life. Michael was changing his life.
Even on the day Michael Jackson died, Tohme rushed to UCLA Medical Center and presented himself as MJ's spokesperson.
Hi, I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Jermaine Jackson, and he's going to read a statement, and if you please, there will be no question. Jermaine? I'd like to make an additional statement, please, that Jermaine Jackson is the only spokesman for the Jackson family. There is no one else is authorized to make any statement on the family behalf except Jermaine Jackson. Thank you very much.
He stated that he would be until he was instructed not to be.
And weeks after Michael died, he said this to Matt.
I'm still in charge of Michael's Jackson's business till otherwise I am informed not to do so.
Apparently, Tohme had stated that a copy of the letter was never sent to him, and MJ's signature on the letter was forged. "I was never fired," he insisted. "I continued to represent Michael. I was still handling his business. I had millions of dollars of Michael's money. If he had fired me, don't you think he would have asked for that money back?"
Wait a minute!
Just about a month before Michael died, Tohme was let go by Jackson and was very bitter about that. Laka was at a meeting when Tohme completely lost it and said he was going to bring death and destruction, I don't know if it was literally, on to the Jackson family.
Tohme is referring to the $5 million he was holding from Michael for the home he had wanted to purchase after This Is It, he dubbed Wonderland.
In just the past couple of weeks, Tohme was back in the news. He turned over $5.5 million of Michael Jackson's money back to Jackson's estate. Tohme says he did it voluntarily. While he refused to speak on camera, Tohme told us off camera the truth about everything will come out. But he wouldn't elaborate on what the truth is or when it will come out.
Arguably, the letter MJ supposedly sent to Tohme did not seem like something MJ would have written, but we all know by now how he truly felt about Tohme. So whether he wrote the letter or not, he wanted Tohme gone. So how exactly did Frank Dileo come back into the fold? Did Michael invite him back, or was he forced in? Randy Phillips told Michael that if he did not agree to hire his one-time business manager, Frank Dileo, whom Michael had fired back in February 1989, the entire deal for the London concerts would be canceled. Michael was in desperate need of the revenue these concerts would generate and could lose everything if he didn't do them. Michael was not in a position to argue with Phillips. I assume Phillips knew this, and since he had set Dileo up with this extremely lucrative position, he had the potential to influence the advice Dileo gave to Michael.
And Randy says to Michael, "It sounds like you have a real comfort level with Frank." He said, "Absolutely." He said, "I should have never fired him, Randy. I love the guy. He's honest. I love his wife. I love his children. He's who I want to manage me."
Frank Dileo first worked with Michael from the mid to late 1980s. He managed the Jacksons' Victory Tour as well as MJ's Bad Tour.
Michael and I built a working relationship when I was vice president of promotion at Epic Records. And through that, it developed on through the Thriller project. And one day while we were having lunch at the Beverly Hills Hotel, we were actually discussing the making of Thriller, the video. And just out of the clear blue, he asked me if I would manage him.
He even executive produced MJ's first full-length movie, Moonwalker, in 1988. The exact reason for his termination is somewhat up in the air. Dileo believed the move was politically motivated, as an attorney of MJ's had fired him, and he personally felt like MJ himself did not make the decision to let him go. Apparently, in an interview in 2004, he stated, "Why did he fire me? That's a good question. But I think he fired me because it was politically asked of him." There was an outside record executive with a big-time lawyer and one executive at Sony who would like to see Michael's power cut in half, and by getting rid of me was half the power. This seems to me like the most logical reason because, let's be for real, why else would Michael Jackson fire pretty much the best manager he had? And I know we like to forget, but Frank Dileo was managing Michael at the height of his career after the success of Thriller.
I managed them doing 1984 to 89.
What
Thriller and Bad, the Victory Tour, and the solo tour.
Let that marinate a bit. Of course, numerous other reasons have been given, such as MJ being angry the Bad album did not do as well as he had hoped, Moonwalker being considered a failure, or that at some point, Dileo was stealing from MJ. Allegedly. Nonetheless, Frank Dileo coming back after being fired 20 years prior is a little unexpected, but not abnormal. I mean, how many times was John Branca fired before becoming the co-executor of the Michael Jackson estate? Anyway, even after MJ fired Dileo, the two eventually became friendly again. In an interview with Hits Daily Double back in July 2009, Dileo stated, "Michael first called me a couple of years ago, after he came back from Bahrain, then was in Ireland and Vegas for a while. We chit-chatted, he called again, and we started communicating about film projects. Apparently, Dileo had an associate that had a special multi-million-dollar fund for the pair to produce films. But with Tohme's dismissal, MJ needed someone who, in his words, knew what he wanted."
So now he calls me in March. It says, "Frank, have you ever met, do you know Randy Phillips?" I said, "No." I said, I know who he is. I said, "To tell you the truth, our paths have never crossed." I said, "When I managed you before, he was doing something else. And I think he was with Rod Stewart."
Yeah, some Rolling Stones or Rod Stewart.
Yeah. I said, I don't know. And he says, "Well, would you do a conference call tomorrow with me and Randy?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do a conference call, but what's it about?" "I don't want to just do a conference call. He said, "Well, I want to know if you'll manage me again." And I said, "Well, yeah, sure." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I'm doing these concerts, and I need help. You know how to do this. You know what I want. Next day, we had a conference call. Michael and I spoke. Randy kind of listened. We got introduced over the phone. And Randy says to Michael, it sounds like you have a real comfort level with Frank. He said, absolutely. He said, I should have never fired him, Randy. I love the guy. He's honest. I love his wife. I love his children. He's who I want to manage me.
According to Mike Smallcombe, per Making Michael, Dileo allegedly convinced Phillips he could keep Michael focused on rehearsals and preparations for London, which was vital for AEG. Karen Fay, who claims Michael fired Dileo in 1989 because he was stealing from him, also says Phillips brought him back. Michael told me he would never hire him again, she said. So which is it? Did Michael rehire Frank Dileo, or did Randy Phillips? I think in this instance, the two can coexist. Let me cook! Perhaps Randy did like how comfortable Michael was with Dileo, and because of that comfort, MJ would listen to whatever Dileo would tell him to do. With that, Randy could whisper things into his ear, who would then whisper them into Michael's, thus giving Randy the opportunity to exercise the control needed to make this tour happen, which in turn would make the quote I read earlier about Dileo only being around because he makes Michael laugh make more sense. Give Mikey the illusion that he did something by bringing in his own management, right? When it seemed in all actuality that MJ had no jurisdiction over his own life. Plus, AEG wanted their people in, and Michael's out. According to Kevin Dorsey, MJ's vocal director, assistant music director, and one of his background vocalists for over 25 years, AEG was trying to slowly phase out MJ's old staff and replace them with their people. Allegedly. Okay, does saying allegedly actually do anything? I mean, I'm just trying to rebuke any lawsuit that could come up, yo.
Something that's a little surprising in hindsight for us fans is that you weren't actually involved in the This Is It rehearsals. Similarly, Brad, who you just mentioned, he wasn't there either as MD. That task was handed off to Michael Bearden. Lavelle Smith Jr., another close collaborator of Michael Jackson, was more or less replaced by Travis Payne. These changes in hindsight are a little bit alarming to fans. Were you in contact with Michael in the lead up to This Is It?
When you say it was a surprise to the fans, it was a surprise to us. We were in all of the meetings prior to rehearsals. I put together the This Is It band. Literally, the day of the first rehearsal, I came to the gate to come in to get started. I mean, like I said, I'd been in all the meetings with Kenny and added Tommy Organ. I'd done this, I'd done all that. Went to the gate to come in for rehearsal and was stopped by security. And I said, what's going on? And they said, you're not on the list. I'm just like, whoa. Next thing I know, Paul Gongaware came out and said, Michael has decided to go in a different direction when it comes to the band. And I said, wow, okay. I called Evie over at MJ's office, and Evie said, Kevin, where are you? I said, I'm at home. She said, why aren't you at rehearsal? I said, I was just told that Michael's decided to go a different direction. And she said, he would never do that. He doesn't know this. And I said, well, that's what I was told.
It was a sudden thing. It wasn't like you didn't get the feeling in these later meetings like things are changing here. Kenny, Michael, they're not as engaged. They want to go somewhere else. It was a sudden, you walked into that arena thinking you were it.
Yeah. I had no other, nothing that ever gave me an inkling of that anything had changed or anything like that. I mean, all my papers, my notes, and all the phone calls with Kenny, the meeting with Kenny, like I said, I put the This Is It band together.
Just in case you may have thought I was conspiring, no, this is fact, straight from the source. It would seem Tohme wasn't the only one trying to build a fence around Michael to keep people out. But let's put this thing down, flip it, and reverse it. What if MJ hired Dileo? I mean, at some point, MJ was trying to hire back a lot of the people he had worked with previously. I think this was his way of regaining the control he had lost during Tohme's reign. Plus, Michael wasn't really a man for change. He didn't like it, even tried to actively avoid it. Perhaps he needed the trust and stability stability his old staff provided. Karen Faye, Michael Bush, Dennis Tompkins, and Kenny Ortega were all invited back to join Michael on This Is It. Perhaps Michael could have wanted the manager who was by his side during the high point of his career, since this was going to be essentially the resurrection of Michael Jackson. All of this seems logical, but based on notes that were found in Michael's bedroom after his passing, probably not true. Per LaToya's words, Michael was a compulsive note-taker. I had never ever seen anyone come as close to writing down all of their thoughts as Michael did. He wrote them on walls, on mirrors, on any surface where he could find room to write. Although he had lived at Carrollwood only since Christmas time, his bedroom was littered with post-it notes that documented his thoughts during the last days of his life. Among the notes were, I hate Tohme Tohme, I hate John Branca, John Branca stole lots of money from me and continuously double and triple billed me, I only agreed to 10 shows, and I don't want Frank Dileo back in my life. And I know that a lot of y'all don't want to trust what my good sis Legend Toya has to say. However, I think she's kind of spitting here. And I don't want to make it seem like MJ was some damsel in distress and couldn't choose his own management or fight against anything, but to repeat what I quoted earlier from her, Michael was in desperate need of the revenue these concerts would generate and could lose everything if he didn't do them. Michael was not in a position to argue with Phillips. I assume Phillips knew this. The last thing I'd like to cover when it comes to Frank Dileo is the All Good Entertainment deal. In 2007, rumors began to swirl about a potential Jackson 5 comeback tour. These rumors continued into 2008. A lot of them were perpetuated by Jermaine Jackson. I think he definitely needed the check at that time. According to an article from Billboard posted in October 2008, he stated, "This has been a long time coming for the Jackson family to get back together. It is just the timing. So what we've been doing is working on the music and all of the logistics. It is going to be more like a family affair. Janet's going to open, and of course the original Jackson 5, Michael, Randy, and the whole family were in the studio. We're planning on being out there next year." At this time, MJ had officially started negotiations with AEG for what would later become the This Is It tour. So he expeditiously shut the comeback rumors down in a statement.
Nobody's bigger than the group.
Y'all ain't stupid. I'm the one selling the records. They coming to see me.
They coming to see the Temptations.
Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis. You wish you could work it the way I do. But you can't. Because there is only one David Ruffin.
Now who put that in there? That's not the statement, although it was an excellent shade. My brothers and sisters have my full love and support, and we've certainly shared many great experiences, but at this time, I have no plans to record or tour with them. I am in the studio developing new and exciting projects that I look forward to sharing with my fans in concert soon. So, what does this have to do with Frank Dileo? Well, before I get into that, basically this whole idea about a Jackson's reunion show started between Joe Jackson and the principal partner of concert promoter All Good Entertainment Inc., Patrick Aloco.
Patrick Aloco is a New Jersey-based concert promoter who spent the last 10 months trying to book Michael Jackson for a one-night gig. His negotiations with Jackson insiders gave him a ringside seat to the pop star's physical, mental, and financial state leading up to the ill-fated London concert series and ultimately Michael's death. Is there a villain in this real-life melodrama?
According to Patrick, per an interview he did with MJJ Community, shortly after meeting Mr. Joe Jackson in Las Vegas about the proposed Jackson family reunion concert, my associate recommended that we follow up with Frank. We met Frank and his partner, Mark Lamica, in Nashville a few weeks later. Why he was told to reach out to Frank Dileo, I'll never know, because Dileo didn't even begin working for MJ until April 2009, and it wasn't formalized until May of 2009. In our current timeline, it's still the fall of 2008, which means the manager role belongs to Dr. Tohme. So it would seem that Dileo not only misrepresented himself as Michael Jackson's manager, but he also signed a letter of intent in November 2008 with All Good Entertainment on behalf of Michael, Janet, and the Jacksons to produce a Jackson family reunion concert, even though he didn't represent any of them. Also, a letter of intent is exactly as it sounds. It's a document written in business letter format that declares your intent to do a specific thing, but it's not legally binding. This will come into play later. When Patrick asked if Dileo at any time represented himself as Michael Jackson's signatory agent / manager, and if he was aware of Dr. Tohme Tohme being Michael's business manager, he replied, "The Dileo-Jackson contract speaks for itself." Frank and Mark Lamica both represented that Frank had several phone conversations with MJ and that he was supportive of our event. Frank obviously executed an agreement that is binding upon Michael, Janet, and the brothers. Dr. Tohme was always positioned as the spokesperson or business manager representing the financial interests of Colony Capital. Seems to me like the math is a mathing. Seems to me that Dileo and his business partner Mark Lamica, who was a known scammer, were attempting to swindle All Good Entertainment out of upfront fees, which would be a $2 million binder fee, along with $550,000 plus commission. Suddenly, 2 + 2 is equaling 4. But this is how Mr. Dileo tells the story.
Some guys came into my office. They said, we'd like to do a world tour with the family, or a pay-per-view. I said, well, Michael's not going to work with his family, and he's not going to do a pay-per-view. And I said, I'll tell you what. You write it up. I'll tell Michael about it. If he wants to do it, fine. But I'm telling you right now, he's not going to do it. I said, you put 10% of the retainer in an escrow account, my account, in which I am going to take $150,000 or up to for expenses, because I'm not flying all over the country to talk to Michael.
On your behalf.
Yeah, on your behalf for nothing. You know, not that I'm looking to get paid. I just want my expenses. I said, I know what it is to sit in a hotel room for 9 days waiting for him to show up. Everybody agreed. They had a deadline. That money never reached that account. We had a call. They needed a little extension. Fine. I gave it to them verbally. The money never hit the account. There's a non-disclosure agreement that all those people signed saying they would not talk about this deal. That, in other words, they had the money. They didn't have to go out and raise it. What they were doing was getting my signature and going out trying to raise the money. That deal was null and void right there because they broke the non-disclosure. So what I think happened, this is just my thought, okay, that they must have borrowed some money for their expenses, and they had to pay that back because they guaranteed the guy the deal was going to happen. Now they're scrambling with a lawsuit, okay? I did not ever tell them I represented Michael Jackson or the brothers, because I didn't. I was Michael's friend.
Now, in the All Good Entertainment agreement that Dileo wrongfully signed, there was a non-compete clause, which basically means, well, your butt is mine. Okay, so it basically means that MJ couldn't perform anywhere in the world prior to the Jackson Family show in July of 2010. And with the impending This Is It deal, that wasn't gonna slide. But wait, wouldn't Dileo know that as MJ's manager?
First of all, Michael signed his deal with AEG, I believe, in London before he made the announcement. I had no idea. We didn't really discuss what he was doing with AEG.
First of all, MJ signed the AEG deal in January 2009 at his home on Carrollwood. Second, as MJ's manager, why didn't you discuss what he was doing with AEG? Especially since you signed him into another deal that would make the AEG contract a conflict. Once Patrick Aloco found out that MJ had signed another contract to do a concert residency with AEG, he said,
"Not on my watch. Not on my watch."
Because he was willing to do anything to get the reunion show to move forward and sued everybody in a $300 million lawsuit. Michael Jackson, his company MJJ Productions Inc., Frank Dileo and his company Dileo Entertainment and Touring Inc., the Anschutz Entertainment Group /AEG Live. Ultimately, the lawsuit was dropped because it was determined that there was a letter of intent between MJ, Frank Dileo, and All Good Entertainment, but never an enforceable contract. Neither MJ nor any of the other members of the Jackson family who were to be involved in the show ever signed a contract. Man, he really thought he ate with that lawsuit though. I guess Frank Dileo is just as slimy as Tohme, but if it came down to Michael choosing between the two of them, Tohme definitely wouldn't be his first choice. But what if there was a third option?
You know, that guy, Leonard Rowe, the idea that he could have been Michael Jackson's financial advisor for 2 minutes, if you knew the list of things that he's had wrong legally, including at least 2 incarcerations.
Leonard Rowe is a concert promoter turned family friend who promoted part of the Jacksons' Victory Tour and worked with a few of the other Jackson siblings on various shows throughout the years. Per his own book, What Really Happened to Michael Jackson, he details the moment he first came into contact with Michael. He states, "I had the honor and privilege of meeting Michael in February of 1979. I flew out to Chicago to speak to his father Joe Jackson about a few concert dates for his sons, the Jacksons, who had faded from the charts in recent years. We all gathered in one of their hotel rooms for a brief meeting. Still to this day, I can remember the first time I met Michael. I immediately noticed something different about him. There was something in his eyes. It was like being in the presence of someone holy. He had a different spirit about him, and I knew at that point he was someone special." Don't let the words of sentiment fool you, though. I don't think Michael particularly liked or trusted Rowe. A YouTube channel by the name of Celebrity Classified has been uploading audio recordings of Michael from the 1980s during the time he was crafting what would become his first autobiography, Moonwalk. In those clips, he says the following about Leonard Rowe. "We once did a tour with a guy who really ripped us off. His name was Leonard Rowe. He ripped us off materially." But this was classic for him, honestly. Leonard Rowe has quite the shady past. He spent time in federal prison in the early 90s for being convicted of wire fraud for his role in the cashing of a fraudulent insurance check. He's actually had multiple arrests for writing bad checks. Not only that, he's been sued by both Ne-Yo and R. Kelly. According to an article from CelebrityAccess.com titled, "Will Michael Jackson's real manager please stand up?"
He said it! He said it!
Rowe is known for his work as a tour promoter and has worked with a number of artists, including Marvin Gaye. However, his most recent spate of publicity stemmed from a string of lawsuits late last year over an R. Kelly tour that Rowe promoted. According to court documents, Kelly accused Rowe of selling shares in Kelly's Double Up tour to investors without Kelly's permission, despite a contractual stipulation that barred such sales. The court agreed and awarded Kelly $3.4 million over the matter. Kelly's suit wasn't the only litigation to stem from the tour, and the investors who'd purchased the non-existent shares in the tour filed suit against Rowe, as did singer Ne-Yo, who won $700,000 judgment against Rowe after he was dropped from Kelly's tour after only 2 shows. So, child, how did he become involved with Michael Jackson? Well, remember that All Good Entertainment deal we just discussed, where Frank Dileo signed essentially a letter of intent in November 2008 to get MJ, Janet, and the Jacksons to do that reunion show? Here's the tea. So, I believe in Frank's attempt at allegedly trying to swindle Patrick Aloco out of the commission and binder fee, Patrick was like, "I'm not giving you anything until you get Michael Jackson's signature on this contract." And he obviously wasn't going to get that, since MJ was about to sign his contract with AEG and couldn't do anything to conflict with the London shows. Since Dileo failed to secure the deal, Joe Jackson took it upon himself to partner with Rowe to make it happen around January 2009. To quote Remember the Time, protecting Michael Jackson in his final days, Rowe went to Patrick Aloco of All Good Entertainment, claiming that he, not Frank Dileo, and not Tohme Tohme, was Michael Jackson's manager. Aloco paid Rowe a $15,000 retainer on the promise that he could set up a meeting with Catherine Jackson, the only person in the Jackson family whom Michael actually spoke to, in the hopes that she could convince her son that joining the family for a reunion would be the better deal. Leonard Rowe prevailed upon Catherine to intervene. Fearing that 50 shows in London would jeopardize his health, she agreed that the reunion was best and started lobbying her son. Getting Miss Jackson involved in this mess was diabolical. Just nasty work. By the end of March 2009, MJ and Rowe had a few conversations. MJ was considering hiring him as his manager. The key word in that sentence is considering. Michael knew Leonard Rowe was full of... It would be at this time Rowe would have his attorney draft a press release stating that he was MJ's official manager, succeeding Dr. Tohme. This press release was not only released without MJ's knowledge, but he was also pissed and stopped taking calls from Leonard Rowe because of it.
Your eyelids reconstructed, eyelids reconstructed.
It's stupid.
None of it's true.
None of it's true. None of it's true. It's BS. They made it up. They lie.
To again quote the article from CelebrityAccess.com, Rowe Entertainment appears to have sparked a controversy after they issued a press release through Champion Management announcing that Leonard Rowe was going to be assuming management duties for the prodigal king of pop, Michael Jackson. Sources close to the matter have told Celebrity Access that Rowe had joined forces with Michael Jackson's father, Joseph Jackson, to convince Michael to let them assume handling the artist's business affairs, but that they had been rebuffed by the singer. On the other side of the issue, Frank Dileo maintains that that Rowe's press release was less than factual and that they managed Jackson. However, AEG's Randy Phillips told Celebrity Access that they have been working with Dr. Tohme Tohme in connection with all of Michael Jackson's dates. Mr. Phillips went on to say that they are currently contemplating no legal action against Rowe and that they aren't planning any press releases.
I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch. I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch.
Fast forward to April 2009, and a meeting is held between Michael and the Dream Team, Joe and Rowe. It started to become less about the All Good Entertainment deal and more about Joe and Rowe wanting a piece of the pie. Per Making Michael, the pair still tried to convince him they were the right men to manage his business affairs for the upcoming tour. Joseph wanted to wrestle control away from AEG. "I'm the only one who can do them," the shows right, he reportedly told gossip columnist Roger Friedman on the phone.
They wanted to get involved and take over the concerts. Joe Jackson said to me, he said, "I got to get in there and fix this because it's no good." Why was it no good? Because he and Leonard Rowe were not getting a cut of it.
Joe and Rowe brought along a pre-prepared letter they wanted Michael to sign, which would appoint Rowe as his representative in all entertainment matters. Under pressure from his father, who was standing over him, Michael signed the letter. But first, he changed the wording, giving Rowe permission only to oversee the tour finances. That's right. Oversee. MJ made sure he wrote that on that letter. A financial overseer only, pertaining to the finances and the O2 shows in London. This can be revoked at any time. Rowe was not MJ's manager at all, and never was. Michael also knew better than to give his father and that ex-convict access to the financial and business aspects of his multi-million-dollar tour. But if MJ knew better, why did he sign that contract to begin with? It's just as I stated earlier. MJ was under pressure from Joe, who was standing over him, according to Frank Dileo.
Where were both you and Leonard Rowe, Michael's manager for a period of time? Did Michael sign two conflict contracts?
Leonard Rowe had Michael sign a contract that said he had the right to review the finances. He did that before I got here. I got here, he says, I signed a contract with Leonard Rowe to look at my finances, the tour finances. I said, well, why would you do that? He said, well, my dad was in the room and they wanted me to sign it, and I signed it. He said, but you have to meet with Leonard and we'll straighten it out. Met with Leonard, he asked me about the contract and stuff, and I said, first of all, Michael signed that because Joseph was looking over his shoulder. I said, second of all, he honestly doesn't want you to be involved, and I can't give you that information because Michael doesn't want you to have it. You're going to have to get it off AEG. The AEG wouldn't deal with him because he has a very checkered past, and they weren't going to do it. So then Michael and I were going to write a letter which he would have signed, would have eliminated him.
And that letter was drafted in May of 2009. It reads, "Dear Mr. Rowe, I hope you are well. After further consideration, I have decided to streamline my business operations at this time. Accordingly, this is to inform you that you do not represent me and I do not wish to have any oral or written communications with you regarding the handling of my business and or personal matters. With respect to my touring matters, please feel free to contact Frank Dileo or Randy Phillips of AEG. Yours truly, Michael J. Jackson." But just like Dr. Tohme, he stated he never received this letter. Really makes you wonder what the United States Postal Service was up to in 2009.
I never received a letter, Larry. I have to receive it first. And I don't think Michael meant for me to receive that letter. I think let me say something, Larry. I think you're missing something here. But I keep saying it. Michael was being controlled. And I'll let you to understand that. I don't think you understand.
He could get to a phone. Did he talk to you on the phone?
I spoke to Michael. I was also in a meeting with Michael, Randy Phillips, one of his employees, Mr. Jackson, and his mother, about 3 weeks before Michael passed. If they wanted me to receive that letter, they could have easily handed that letter to me. But that letter was never handed to me, and Joe can verify that. That's right.
The one thing I will say about Leonard Rowe is he knew MJ was being, allegedly, controlled by Randy Phillips. He knew MJ never wanted to rehire Frank Dileo, and he knew at the rate things were going, MJ would never make it to London. Per Rowe's book, he states, if Michael brought anyone into his life that did actually have his best interest in mind, they would do anything and everything within their power to eliminate that person, which they demonstrated in their efforts to get rid of me. Randy Phillips and Frank Dileo claimed that Michael had hired Frank Dileo to be his manager manager and he was to replace me. I never heard any of this from Michael. When it came to Michael Jackson, it appeared that Randy Phillips had a tendency to make things like he wanted them to be without having a signed agreement or a contract in place. I have asked numerous times, where is Frank Dileo's management contract signed by Michael? They surely would have one if it was Michael's wish, but it wasn't. In my opinion, this was an act that was forced on Michael by Randy Phillips. Michael told me himself that he would never hire Frank Dileo again. He could have hired Frank Dileo before he signed an agreement with me, but he didn't. In my opinion, and the words of Michael, this was a move being forced on him by Randy Phillips in an effort to get rid of me. A lot of what Rowe stated here is true, even though he seems to be a bit delulu about his appointment as MJ's manager. I do feel like whenever there was someone who was trying to have MJ's best interest at heart, they were eliminated. Multiple sources have stated MJ never wanted Frank Dileo back in the picture, and according to notes LaToya found in Michael's room, he felt that way too. So, who was MJ's real manager? Technically, the last manager he chose and hired was Dr. Tohme. Because, I mean, why wasn't there a contract between Dileo and MJ? There's documentation supporting the dismissal of Rowe and Tohme, yet nothing for Frank Dileo. It seems like these claims of AEG controlling MJ may have some validity. Of course, they denied it though. This, however, is just the beginning of a tale of deceit, greed, and sorrow. It would seem like everything is now in place for the main event. We've gotten a recap of Michael's life throughout the 2000s, everything from his squabble with Sony to the 2006 World Music Awards. We also took a deep dive into his finances and how the life sustained on borrowing he was living would continue to dig him deeper into debt. The only way out, of course, would be for MJ to return to work, thus giving us the catalyst for the This Is It tour. Speaking of tours, we explored every tour and one-off show performance of Michael's solo career, learning that when he stated he went through hell touring, he wasn't lying. He experienced everything from chronic insomnia, dehydration, and poor nutrition, leading him down the rabbit hole of doctors and prescription drugs. Finally, we covered Michael's ever-changing management and how it seemed like no one had Michael Jackson's best interest at heart. And now, it's showtime, darling. If you enjoyed part 1 of this series, go ahead and give it a like and perhaps leave a comment. A savage would really appreciate it, sis. To keep up with updates as the series comes out, or to keep up with updates on yours truly, darling, follow me on my socials, the artist previously known as Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at _Hannah Savage, or you can check the community tab on my channel for updates as well. We've also got super thanks now, darling. If you'd like to give a savage some change without doing anything strange, we trying to get a new computer out here. But don't feel obligated to donate though. I appreciate you if you do, and I still appreciate you if you don't, because I know it's hot out here, and these bills have had me crying, bypass the screaming and throwing up. Please check out Luna Joe / Jolanda's Michael Jackson What Did Happen After June 25th series, TeamMichaelJackson.com, and VindicateMJ.wordpress.com. All of these sources have been an amazing help. All source material is at the link in the description. If your work was featured in this series and not credited, please let me know and I will document it accordingly. Thank you so much for watching and for your patience with me getting this series out. In case y'all may not know, I do my own stunts. Research, editing, writing, graphics, so it takes me a minute. Plus, I want to give as much detail, care, and honesty as possible when talking about this subject. Also, thank you for 3,000 subscribers! That's insane, honestly. I never thought this many people would like to watch me talk about Michael Jackson for over 2 hours. Y'all are some real ones, and I love and appreciate you pimps. I'd also like to give special thanks to all the lovely folks at the MJ cast, Jamin Bull, Charlie Carter, Charlie Thompson, Damian Shields, Dean, also known as Mr. Flute, and my friend, Terrell Yuja. 2023 was one of the most trying years of my life, and his friendship and support really helped me through. If it wasn't for him, y'all might not be watching this right now. So please show him some love. He's an up-and-coming independent film creator. You can stream his full-length feature film Without Love on Tubi. You might see me in it. Also check out his YouTube channel. You might see me over there as well, darling. Thank you again for watching, and I will see y'all on the dark side in part 2.